Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the special Planning Commission, Santa Barbara Planning Commission meeting of the 26th of October, and invite everyone to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. A couple of upfront announcements. First of all, our Commissioner Blau is present in the Santa Maria hearing room. Good afternoon, Commissioner Blau.
Good afternoon.
And Commissioner Valencia, our chair, is at a medical appointment. He believes he will be along soon. So in his absence, I will get the meeting started, and then he can pick up once he arrives. So today being a special meeting, we don't have all the usual precursors, but I would invite Mr. Villalobos to give the TV coverage announcement and call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The special hearing of October 26, 2011 will be televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSTV Channel 20 at 2 p.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orcutt areas. Rebroadcast of the special hearing will be on Thursday, October 27, 2011 at 5 p.m. and on Saturday, October 29, 2011 at 9 a.m. on CSB-TV Channel 20. And now for the roll call, Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Brooks.
Here.
Commissioner Blau.
Here.
And Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
And as Mr. Cooney indicated, Mr. Valencia will be joining us a little later.
Thank you, Mr. Villalobos. Before we get to the business of the day, I'm just going to invite anyone that has a comment for the commission, public comment, to come forward. Do we have any speaker slips, Commissioner Brown? We have tree farm comments, but not general comments on matters not on the agenda. Is that right? No one's coming forward? No one in Santa Maria, Commissioner Blau?
No, I'm by myself, thank you.
All right. Apparently we have no one with comments on matters other than the tree farm project, and for that we certainly will invite public comment and ask everyone to fill out a speaker slip and pass it along to Commissioner Brown so she can organize them. So we'll turn then, without further ado, to the project of the day, the Cavaletto Tree Farm Housing Project, and ask our clerk to read it into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Jeff Nelson, agent for the applicants to consider case numbers 01 GPH 9, 01 RZN 15, 08 DVP 12, 09 TRM 1, 09 RDN 1, and 11 GOV 12 applications filed on December 31st, 2001, March 28th, 2008, and June 6, 2009. And to certify the Environmental Impact Report 11 EIR 2 pursuant to the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Villalobos. This is a continuation of our hearing commenced on the 19th of October at our last meeting, and we have a number of matters we still had to go, and we have a fresh memorandum from Alex Tuttle, our planner. And Mr. Tuttle, you might discuss this and any other pending items before we get started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Since our hearing last Wednesday, at the hearing last Wednesday, your Commission raised some questions and some issues were discussed, especially with the County Fire Department and County Public Roads Department in regards to the circulation network within and adjacent to the project site. And there were some questions also related to the composition of affordable units within the proposed project. Since that time, we've had an opportunity to have a meeting with County Public Works and County Fire and the applicant, wherein we discussed the options for the roadway network and the circulation through the project site, and I wish to report back on the outcome of those meetings. In addition, staff met with the applicant yesterday to discuss some requested modifications the applicant had on a number of conditions of approval that we wish to go over with you as well. The requests were identified in a letter from Jeff Nelson to the Planning Commission dated October 14th, 2011, which you should have in your record. So basically, this will be a short presentation, but I will just highlight the issues related to affordable housing, and then go over the options were discussed on the roadway issues, and then end up with an overview of the issues raised with the conditions of approval. We don't need to go over this again, but just know that these slides of project vicinity and the project site and the site plan are available to reference throughout the discussion today, and any questions you may have. In regards to affordable housing, 3 options have been discussed both at last week's meeting and in prior conversations with the applicant and in letters from the applicant to your commission and to P&D staff. And those options have been what was proposed as part of the 2008 application and carried forward through the environmental review and the staff report, which was the provision of 24 affordable rental units under the state density bonus program. The exact composition of those affordable units and the income levels was a little up for grabs, but they would generally be targeting the low and moderate income rental rates. More recently, the applicant submitted a proposed modification to the affordable housing program, which was to reduce the number of units regulated under the state density bonus program from 24 down to 8, but target those rental units at the very low income category. And by doing so, by targeting the lower income category, the state density bonus program allows fewer units required to satisfy the program's provisions. So the lower the income target, the fewer number of units you have to provide. So 8 very low units under the state density bonus program, which satisfies the requirements of the bonus program. And in addition to that, with the other 16 units that make up those 4 sixplexes, those 24 apartments adjacent to Patterson Avenue, the applicant has looked at a City of Santa Barbara project that was approved back in 2008 as a model for a different type of approach, which is new to the county, and I'll highlight that in a second. And then the third option would be in lieu fees. It was discussed at last week's hearing that the county is looking at their housing element and their in lieu fee ordinance, and it's likely that some changes will be made to that over the next 1 or 2 years. So the applicant wanted to retain some flexibility in terms of how he would satisfy the affordable requirements in order to match the economic climate or the housing climate at the time when those units are being constructed. Absent the ability to provide that level of flexibility, and knowing that your commission wants a single proposal before you to act on and to recommend forward to the Board of Supervisors, just to highlight what the applicant's current proposal is. And that again is the 8 very low income units that would be rental units regulated by the county, and then 16 for sale units following the City of Santa Barbara's model project. The features of that include establishing an initial starting sales price. The applicant has suggested $409,000, and apply a maximum appreciation, annual appreciation to that sales price of no more than 2.5% per year for 35 years. Of course, if the market is flat or going down, those units would similarly be flat or go down, but the 2.5% would be the upper limit. The other provisions would be that the purchaser of a unit would have to work within the South Coast, and the intent with that is to help support the jobs housing balance and reduce long commutes. The third provision is that, and this is where it probably differentiates significantly from the county's affordable housing program, is there's no income eligibility. Hence the importance of establishing an appropriate starting sales price. And lastly, that the owner, purchaser of the unit must occupy the unit so that it wouldn't be used as an income generating rental. Staff has raised concerns that the starting sales price may be too high, $409,000 in today's market actually exceeds some similarly for sale prices in the neighborhood. Looking at the adjacent Sunrise Village, identified 2 properties within that subdivision or with that condominium complex that are currently for sale at less than $400,000, and those are market rates. And also, if you take that starting sales price and apply that 2.5% per year appreciation, you can see how within a relatively short period of time it could get beyond reach of the target population, which is the workforce family. So to that end, planning and development would recommend that if this is the type of project or program combination of affordable units that we want to move forward with, that we tie the starting sales price to match what it would be if that unit were governed under the county's inclusionary housing program, which, in talking with housing community development staff, currently that would be approximately $360,000 for a comparable 2-bedroom unit. The starting price is it varies based on a number of factors, including the interest rate that are in place and the HOA dues. The lower the HOA dues, the higher the starting sales price would be. But that is the current sales price, and obviously it changes year to year. In regards to roadways and phasing, as you heard at the last hearing and through numerous public comment letters, as well as comments that were submitted on the draft EIR, there's a great neighborhood concern for project traffic flowing through the neighborhood to the south and impacting their pedestrian safety and traffic congestion on their roadways. The specific concern is about opening up Merida Drive to residents within the project site and making that a through road, not only for resident traffic, but during construction for construction traffic as well. It's worth pointing out that in discussions with County Fire and County Public Works Roads Division, that the more connections the better in terms of general circulation within a community and for emergency exits. It's always better to have more connections than less. But that aside, there is no county requirement from any of the departments that the connection with Merida Drive be opened and created and established. But if it is closed, then there's certain requirements that would have to be met. And so we essentially, in our meeting on Monday, identified 2 different approaches that could be taken, and I wanted to just go over those real quickly. The first option would be to eliminate the connection with Merida Drive. And what would happen under that scenario is that the interior road through the project site to the north, which is a private road and would connect with Avenida Pequeña, that would have to be slightly redesigned to make it more of a through road with fewer impediments, such as any type of bulb outs or dips in the road that would otherwise impede emergency access. In order to meet the requirements of the Goleta Community Plan in terms of having 2 routes of egress and ingress, the connection with Avenida Pequeña through that development would have to occur as part of Phase 2. And in this scenario, both Merida Drive and Tree Farm Lane would have to end in back-to-back cul-de-sacs so that emergency vehicles would have turnaround capabilities. In this situation, Tree Farm Lane would become private road in between Las Perlas and Merida, and it would be a public road in between Las Perlas and Patterson Avenue. So those are the conditions that would have to be met if the connection with Merida Road or Merida Drive were closed. The second option that was discussed is establishing the connection with Merida Drive, but delaying its connection until the end of the project. In this situation, all of the improvements, all of the roadway improvements, including the overpass improvements at Patterson and 101, would have to be installed. And essentially, the connection would not be created until the very end of the project after all of the other phases are completed. Some additional measures that would be added would be to add a roundabout at close to the connection point with Merida Drive. That would slow traffic going around that turn into the neighborhood to the south. County Fire has and Public Works also discussed other traffic calming measures that could be implemented along Merida Drive to ensure to slow traffic and make sure that there's no pedestrian safety issues. Those designs would have to be worked out with and make sure they get agreement by County Fire, who you heard last week indicate some resistance to certain types of measures such as speed bumps and speed humps that slow their response times. But there's other types of techniques that can be used that don't impede their access to that degree. Under this approach or scenario similar to the other is the connection with Avenida Pequeña be moved into the second phase. And again, that's to make sure that there's two routes of ingress and egress after or as part of phases 2, 3, 4, and 5. And in this situation, Tree Farm Lane would become public all the way from Merida Drive to Patterson Avenue. But again, that connection point with Merida would not be opened up until the very end of phase 5, after everything else is completed. So those were the two options that were discussed, and it's the discretion of your commission and ultimately the Board of Supervisors to determine which of those options you wish to take. I did want to point out that under either scenario, in discussions with Public Works and County Fire and the applicant, it was determined that the most appropriate approach for construction traffic in order to reduce impacts to the neighborhood and to the residences is to come in from the north through Avenida Pequeña and Las Perlas Drive. And you can see in this slide showing that route. That's the most direct approach and has the least interface with residences in terms of active driving and vehicles parked along the roadways and front yards. Coming along Las Perlas and Avenida Pequeña, that's primarily going along the backyards of the community to the east, and there's only a small number of complexes or residential units along the west side of Avenida Pequeña that would be impacted by that traffic route. Moving on then, just to highlight a few of the conditions of approval that were discussed with the applicant. The applicant had raised several questions about many of the conditions of approval that came out of the EIR or that were adopted for the purposes or incorporated for the purposes of policy consistency. Many of them was just a matter of clarifying their applicability or their intent as far as how they'd be implemented. But there were a few in which, in talking with the applicant, identified some areas where modifications could be possible without affecting their implementation or their intent. One is in regards to the timing of the overpass improvements at South Patterson and 101. Right now, the condition reads that the improvement would have to be in place before before you get occupancy clearance for phase 1. and that the approval would have to, from Caltrans, would have to be in place before they could start constructing phase 1. Recognizing that Caltrans approval is somewhat hard to gauge as far as how quickly that would occur, the staff has suggested some proposed modifications to the timing to allow at least phase 1 to move forward without waiting for Caltrans approval. Since phase 1 is only 20 units, there would not be a significant number of peak hour trips added to that intersection to where that impact would be triggered. So the timing would be that the application to Caltrans would be submitted concurrent with the application for zoning clearance for phase 1. Phase 1 could then proceed. Approval from Caltrans would have to be obtained prior to approval of zoning clearance for phase 2, and then the improvements would have to be in place before occupancy clearance on the first unit within phase 2. So that would make sure that before you have your 21st new residents out there, you have that improvements completed. A second issue was in regards to the payment of development impact mitigation fees, and that was just to clarify that because this is a phased project, the payment of those fees, which are typically timed to coincide with either the issuance of permits or the occupancy clearance sign-off from the building division, would be phased as well. And looking at the ordinances for those fees, it's consistent with the provisions in those. So they'd be phased as well. In regards to construction timing, the current condition reads that construction would be limited to the hours of 8 to 5, and that's noise generating construction, and not to occur on weekends or state holidays. The applicant has asked for a slight modification to that to better coincide with the typical construction workday, but also to reduce overlap with peak hour travel, and that is to allow the construction hour from down to 7:30 to 4:30, with the intent being, again, fewer interruptions with typical commuter times, as well as that's sort of more closely related to the standard construction schedule. That combined with the traffic route that we had shown on the previous slide, feel that it's meets the same general intent as the original condition. And there was a recommended mitigation measure in the EIR to address greenhouse gases, and that was to provide for an on-site electrical vehicle charging station within the common parking area that was proposed near the open or common area amenity facilities. That, again, that was a recommended mitigation measure. It wasn't required to reduce any significant impact. The application or the project has since eliminated that parking area from the design, so there's no real suitable location for the charging station any longer. So staff agrees that it's no longer applicable to this project, and so suggest deleting that condition from the conditions of approval. Another recommended condition was for incorporating various energy conserving techniques into the project design. The condition provides sort of a suite of options and different approaches that can be incorporated into design to reduce energy use. It currently reads that those options be incorporated unless the applicant can demonstrate the infeasibility to the department. Had some questions about how does one show infeasibility, because it's somewhat of a vague standard. So the language has just been slightly revised to, rather than having to demonstrate infeasibility, it's using those measures to the extent feasible and where applicable to the project. For example, one of the options is to have light-colored roofs, which has other consequences from aesthetic and glare standpoint. So the intent is to incorporate those where possible, but not require all of them, and to be tailored to the project. And then lastly, in regards to the affordable housing condition, as you know now, the applicant's proposal is with the 8 very low units and the 16 4-cell units. Condition 64 is currently written requiring the provision of 24 rental units, which was consistent with the original submittal. But staff is prepared to modify that condition per the applicant's proposal, consistent or with concurrence by your commission, with the understanding that the price would be tied, the starting sales price would be tied with the county's program to ensure affordability. And that concludes my presentation. Certainly available to answer any questions you may have. And I know the applicant has prepared some slides as well that highlight specifically what each of the phases would look like, and as well as some other information that they're prepared to provide.
Thanks, Mr. Tuttle. I'm sure we have questions, and we'll start with Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I have some ex parte. I've been the recipient of many emails, all of which I have forwarded to Mr. Villalobos, and hopefully you've gotten them all. And secondly, I was in attendance at that meeting on Monday with county staff, the applicant, county staff, both roads, fire department, and planning. I didn't receive any new information. Everything that we discussed was provided by Mr. Tuttle at this hearing, and I've also had some phone conversations with neighbors in the interim as well.
Before you start, let me ask the rest of the commissioners if they've had any additional ex parte to report. Commissioner
No, I
Brooks?
haven't.
Commissioner Blau?
Yes, I did have a discussion with Jeff Nelson this morning.
Okay, thank you. And I had a telephone conversation of considerable length on Saturday, I believe it was, with a close neighbor to the proposed project, Mrs. O'Leary, whom I've known for many, many years. And while some of the issues she raised we've discussed already and certainly will discuss, she did place emphasis on certain traffic issues which will come out in the course of the discussion today. So, okay. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question. Alex has done a good job of doing a compendium of the issues today, but there are some other issues that I have, and I'm just wondering how you would like to proceed. I think most of the people here today probably are here to speak, I'm not sure, probably about the opening of Merida. There may be some others. There's one probably to talk about the bike bridge, and I have one other issue as well. So could you just lay out how you'd like to proceed today, and then...
Here's where my thinking takes me,
Okay,
if it's acceptable to the rest of the commission. That is, we've had a presentation on certain issues that we all have questions about. I'd like to explore those with staff before we go any further. Then I think we would offer a chance to the applicant to discuss those issues and present any other issues which haven't been discussed, and then open the public comment. And so we minimize the amount of time people have to be here. Then we'll circle back and finish our discussion with staff of alternatives. That's okay.
Okay, that's great. Then, if I may.
You may.
All right, thank you. I have the staff report, the staff memorandum from May 2006, and if the other commissioners would like a copy, I'd be more than happy to have Mr. Villalobos make a copy, where it had talked about in the initiation hearing that the applicant was going to provide not only more dwelling units, 169 net new, but also, and I think Mr. Tuttle has referenced this, 33 moderate and workforce, as well as 20 second dwelling units. Now, over the course of time, all of this has changed, and we are where we are here today. And I know that Mr. Nelson has provided us someplace some chart that sort of rates or characterizes kind of the quality of the affordable units. I'm not sure, I can't put my fingers on that, but I'm wondering if you can address not only that issue of the sort of the quality, if that chart, if you recall that chart, and also the fact that this is an initiation hearing, a general plan amendment initiation hearing, and we've seemed to have lost a considerable number of units, particularly the second dwelling units, which are oftentimes considered affordable.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, as far as the first question goes, I believe what you're referencing is the applicant, or Jeff Nelson specifically, had made reference to how do you compare a very low income unit to a low income unit to a moderate or to a workforce, because they are targeting different populations and they have different value attached to them. The county doesn't attach any clear value as one over the other. Jeff Nelson pointed to the state density bonus program as one way in which to make that comparison as far as value. And what he was pointing to is that under the state program, to qualify, or the minimum requirement is that you provide either 5% very low income, 10% low income, or 20% moderate income. And so if you were to take those percentages that reflect the minimum requirements, Mr. Nelson was suggesting that a very low income unit is twice as valuable as a low income unit and 4 times as valuable as a moderate income unit. And so by providing 8 very low income units, it equates under that standard to 32 moderate income units. That is not something that we necessarily would use or point to as a way to make that comparison, but it's certainly one approach. In regards to your second question as to the initiation is a step that is taken to when a rezone or a general plan amendment is required for a project. It's the county's practice to require an initiation by the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors before that rezone and general plan amendment gets processed forward through to approval. An initiation doesn't reflect an approval. It's just an action by the decision makers that this project can at least move forward through the permitting process. But it's in no way meant to mean that the project is approved or denied. And it also, in terms of your question, doesn't necessarily tie the project into adhering to what was in place at the time of initiation. As we can see for this project, and what I think we all understand is the housing market certainly has changed a lot over the last 5 years, and I think, and the applicant would likely speak to this, that their design has changed both to reflect more specific site design and more formulation of the specific housing types that have shown up on the property or on the project design, but also reduction in units to reflect the current housing market. But that's not to say that the initiation and what was assumed at the time of initiation doesn't carry any weight, because the number of affordable units proposed at the time of initiation, as I recall, certainly was a large factor in the board initiating the project at the density that it was. And I know there was a lot of importance placed on the provision of affordable units with this project.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes. I know with the general plan amendment, I'm going to be looking for significant community benefits, and I hope that we'll hear many of those during our hearing today. With the affordable housing, now originally when the 24 units were proposed, there was going to be an on-site manager's unit. with 8 very low, does that unit disappear?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brooks, my understanding is if you have a certain number of rental units, you're required to have an on-site manager. I believe 8 is below that threshold. Can confirm with the applicant, but I believe with just the 8 very low income units, there would no longer be an on-site manager.
Commissioner Brown?
I just have a general question about, and maybe the applicant would need to answer this, HOA fees and how they are distributed amongst the units, particularly in the last phase when all the affordable apartment units at the eastern end are to be built. How are fees divvied up amongst the units? Do the affordable units not pay HOA fees? Are they excluded from some? Can you explain some of that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, I don't know the specific details of the HOA fees. My understanding is that the rental units would not be paying HOA dues, and those would be the affordable, clear affordable units. The other, depending on the composition of affordable units, if there are those 16 for-sale units, they would be paying HOA dues. I don't know if it's a reduced amount or what. That the applicant would be better positioned to answer that.
So we can delay finalization of that question. Commissioner Blau, questions at this point?
Not at this point, thank you.
All right, Mr. Tuttle, I have a few. With regard to the affordable housing alternatives, I guess I don't understand how each of the various options would impact the state density bonus. Is it the same under all those alternatives, and therefore the applicant's request for concessions would be still in play?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, putting in lieu fees aside, because that's an option that would be used if in lieu fees become more affordable, and they would then no longer be constructing any affordable units on site. The two options before you are the 8 very low income units with the 16 for-sale units. Those 16 for-sale units would not be governed by the state density bonus, only those 8 very low income units. With the provision of 8 very low income units, that represents approximately 7 or 8% of the density of the project site. With that percentage, you're only entitled to 1 incentive or concession. If the applicant were to provide 24 affordable units under the state density bonus, whether they be very low or low units, they would be entitled to two incentives or concessions. That said, and you'll likely hear from the applicant on this today, the two modifications that they are pursuing are setback modifications and a reduction from 40% down to 38% in open space. They have clarified, the applicant clarified today that, or to staff this morning and to your commission later, that they are requesting those not as incentives but as modifications to development standards under the provisions of the Land Use Development Code for development plans. You have the authority, or the Board of Supervisors has the authority with the development plan to modify certain development standards. Setbacks would be one of those. So the applicant is pursuing the setback modification and the reduction in open space not as an incentive under state density bonus, but actually as a modification to their development plan.
All right. Welcome to Commissioner Valencia. And while you're setting up, I'll just continue here for a couple of minutes. I was in the middle of questioning about the new issues raised today by staff. With regard to the phasing and in particular the options with regard to Merida. Under option 1, you indicated that one of the impacts of closing it all together would be the conversion of the project, the Central Artery Tree Farm Lane from public to private. But all along, one of the heralded advantages of the project has been public access through the project by bicycle, walking access. And so the question is, under that alternative, is it contemplated that the public would acquire an easement over that private road, or is it that the community would become gated and unavailable to the public for any passage?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I think what has been contemplated or discussed would be that the Merida Drive and Tree Farm Lane would both end in cul-de-sacs, but there would be at least pedestrian access between the two, or bicycle access, so that residents of the project site would be able to walk or bike down to the open space along Merida or to the Berkeley Bridge or through the community, and vice versa. I don't know that would involve, as whether that would involve the acquiring or dedication of easements, I'm not sure. But I think that
I'm pretty sure.
It was contemplated that there would at least be that level of access, just not for vehicles.
Okay, and then the other crucial question under that option is the connection to Avenida Pequeña from the north. You didn't mention that, but there is ambiguity in my mind based on the written materials we've received up to this point as to exactly what the nature of the right to connect to Avenida Pequeña is. But that north connection, as indicated by our fire department representatives, is a condition of closing off Merida. So do you have information, some of which the applicant can fill in after, I'm sure?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, as you can see on this slide, there is an existing driveway off of Avenida Pequeña that is used for access to the Cathedral Oaks Village community in this location. And when this development was created and this subdivision was approved, there was an offer to dedicate this access point to the county. And that that offer to dedicate still stands. The county never accepted the offer, but the offer is still valid. And so the applicant has requested that as part of your action on this project in terms of forwarding recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, that it includes accepting of that offer of dedication, which would then result in this portion between the project site and Avenida Pequeña being a private road with some public easement.
So it wouldn't become a public road, it would still be a private road, but the public would have the right to cross over it.
Correct. And county, there is a representative from County Public Works here who might be able to speak more to that issue if you have further questions.
Well, I'm certain that we'll want to hear from Public Works as well as the fire department on updates in a minute, but let's keep the flow going on the questions you have. So I'll go to option 2, and you indicated there that all of the construction traffic would be under either of those two options would be coming from the north, that is Cathedral Oaks to Avenida Pequeña, and then to the project on Las Perlas, right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that is correct. Here's the slide that indicates that this is a proposed construction route. Obviously, it depends on PC's and the board's concurrence on this, and ultimately on action. And what we would do is include a separate condition of approval that would put this in writing, as far as this would be the route for construction vehicles and access.
I just have looked at the condition, but maybe you could outline it clearly for everybody. How would we be sure that construction traffic is using that particular route exclusively and not turning on Agano and coming down and adding dramatically to the impact on the neighborhood to the south?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, as with all of our conditions, with a project such as this, it's subject to permit compliance. So throughout the construction period, we will have permit compliance staff out there periodically monitoring compliance with our various conditions. We also have building inspectors and grading inspectors out there periodically during construction, enforcing various conditions as well. There is a specific condition for traffic control requiring traffic control flag crew for directing construction trips, especially in the morning peak hour times. And lastly, we have a very active community, as we've seen here with this hearing, that any complaints that are received as far as identification of vehicles not using the proper route could be directed to the county, and we would investigate and take action as necessary.
Well, I know we have those usual and reliable means of determining the compliance, but I'm particularly interested in what you described as construction traffic control. It doesn't appear in the conditions now to be very fleshed out as to how often that's to occur, during what hours, and exactly how that's going to be financed. But that would be a large concern of mine, that we have some ability ourselves to look to a monitor that has sole responsibility for being sure that traffic moves consistently with the rest of the traffic in the neighborhood.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, right now the condition is worded that traffic control monitors be posted on Agana and Merida Drive, specifically between 7:30 and 8:30 a.m. on weekdays. This condition was written before the hearing discussion and the selection of this more preferred construction route, so we would certainly need to go in and modify this condition depending on the direction of your commission, and be happy to make it tighter as far as and more clear to satisfy your concerns.
All right, well, that covers my questions for your initial presentation. And Commissioner Valencia, you didn't hear his presentation, but we were focusing our comments on these crucial areas that have been discussed in hearings and meetings between now and last week. Do you have any questions at this time?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I recall at the last meeting that many of these things came up, not every one of them, but I recall what the problems were. And I recall that Merida was the major problem, and now it looks like we have an alternate solution, and that seems like a fine thing for me. So no problem.
No
Please
questions.
continue.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, I did have one question. If Meredith does become a cul-de-sac, who's going to pay for the installation? And if it is the applicant, is he going to get credit against traffic mitigation fees, since this is an off-site requirement?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, the discussion at our meeting on Monday with the county roads and the applicant was that the applicant would be paying for that cul-de-sac on Merida. As to whether or not there'd be a credit of that repair from their traffic fees, I think that would be a question to Public Works. I don't have the answer to that.
Okay, then the only follow-up question will be to County Council. That I don't think it's proper that we require construction improvements on roads that are not connected to the project. Am I correct, or am I mistaken with that?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Blau, I was just looking at that as I heard that statement, and so I'm going to look at it further and I'll respond. But
Thank you.
I am concerned about it as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Council. Would you like to chime in at this point, Will? All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, Public Works has discussed the issue of whether or not a cul-de-sac at the end of Merida would be the requirement of the applicant and whether or not there is a nexus to require that. And Public Works seems to think that due to the nature of the cul-de-sac being frontage improvements, Public Works does have the ability to condition the cul-de-sac improvement as a condition of the project.
Even though it's not a part of this project? I understand you can do the cul-de-sac for the Tree Farm Lane one, but how could you make me put in a cul-de-sac on somebody else's property that I don't control?
No, it'd be on their property.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, it would be required to be on their property and would be considered frontage improvements. It would require a redesign to put that cul-de-sac in.
Okay, so you're going to actually make the connection to Meredith, but you're going to have a cul-de-sac on the subject property, not two cul-de-sacs like we talked about last week.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blau, there are several options on the table. One option that was discussed at the meeting would be two cul-de-sacs back-to-back with bicycle and pedestrian access. How that would work out on a plan still needs to be discussed, whether or not it would be on the existing park that fronts Merida, or whether or not the cul-de-sac would be required to be put on the applicant's property. The other option that was discussed was a roundabout. But either way, there is the nexus that this would be a frontage improvement, and therefore the cost would be borne by the applicant.
Okay, I need to see a map, and I think County Council would too, but we'll discuss that later.
It's a good issue. We'll set that one aside for more discussion. Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. I'm looking at also option one, and if Merida and Tree Farm Lane, if they both end in cul-de-sacs or whatever will be discussed later on, there's also the option then that Tree Farm Lane is private for part of it and public for the other. How, maybe later on we'll get more into that, but does that affect the burying and the undergrounding of the utility lines on the private road, if that should be determined that that's the way the project will go? And when we get to talking about the power lines, I'm looking at possibly the lower level power lines, and later if we discuss the higher power lines, 70 feet.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brooks, I believe there's an existing easement for the Southern California Edison that runs along that location already. So whether it's private or public road, there's that existing easement, so there'd be no issue with undergrounding of those lines. As far as the water and sewer utilities, I believe there's a preference for the Goleta Water District and Goleta Sanitary District to install their service connections within public roads. But I don't believe there's a prohibition of doing it within a private road. We'd have to look at that and determine whether or not there would need to be a public easement along that section of the private road to allow for those, or what. I'm not sure the mechanics of how that would work.
Commissioner Brown?
Okay, thank you. On one of the conditions of approval, the applicant's requesting modifying timing of the overpass improvements to be completed prior to Phase 2 occupancy. Does the City of Goleta have any say in this, because those improvements are in their jurisdiction? Isn't that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, they don't really have a say as far as the timing of the improvements. They do have some oversight as far as the nature and approval of the improvements, but not as to the timing as it relates to this project.
Okay. And the other question is about the mitigation fees to be paid in each phase, not all at once. It is possible that because this project is in 5 phases, that it could be from start to finish 10 years apart. I don't know, some number. And it is possible that inflation could be taking place during that time. Is there any inflator applied to fees over the period, or?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, excellent question. Impact fees are adjusted annually, and you would be responsible for paying the fees based on the amount in place at the time you pay the fee. So it would be going up on an annual basis.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have a question on Christmas Tree Lane, the extension that's going on to Cathedral. There's a unit proposed there on the track. Would that unit be eliminated? I don't have a, thank you, sir. There's this unit here. Would that, when the,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Valencia.
yes.
There's no direct. There's not a proposal for direct connection straight up through the project site to Cathedral Oaks. The intention all along, and hasn't changed, would be to follow to the right through this avenue and connect with Avenida Pequeña out to Cathedral Oaks.
Well, in one of the maps that I saw where you had a red line going all the way up there. What did that indicate? That follows Las Perlas and Avenida Pequeña. That red line is adjacent to the project site, but doesn't create any new road. It just uses existing roads. There is a road that goes all the way to Cathedral Oaks?
Correct. It's Avenida Pequeña. It's an existing public road.
I see. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioners. All right. Why don't we, at this point, I'll turn the chair back over to you and invite Mr. Nelson and his team to address these issues and any others they would like to raise at this point, and then we'll go to public comment.
Okay, Alex, if you can move to the PowerPoint. Good afternoon, Jeff Nelson for the Cavallotto team, and I'm going to hit most of the points here. Maybe Bob Flowers can come up as necessary to discuss, backfill some things, but let me try to hit some of your questions first. And both chairs, Valencia and Cooney. Sorry, it's a rare time to have 2 chairs here, so anyway, I just want to honor that. As to Merida and the connection at Merida, it's not a late-breaking news that the project connects there. This street has always butted there, and I assume it's in the circulation element that's one of the streets that goes through. Larry Cavallotto said it was originally planned to go all the way through here. There was a road. This was a public road. This was offered as dedication as a public road, both of those. Then it was to swoop down here, so you'd have connectivity, and so this one has gone by the wayside, but we do some of the original contemplated connection. So in coming up with the application at the outset, it was obvious that you have to come up with, okay, what is the essential circulation of the project? And this connecting to Patterson is not on the circulation element. All of these other roads are part of the road infrastructure that you have here. This is part of the road infrastructure. So it didn't dawn on us to not connect Merida. If we had, it would have, people were concerned about new communities being too exclusive and not connected with existing neighborhoods. It would have been viewed as politically inappropriate to try to create some exclusivity barrier between this neighborhood and this neighborhood. So what the first step in the process is you go to the subdivision committee. And we went to the subdivision committee composed of all of the departments, roads, fire, et cetera, I think first in 2001. And so you start building the basic requirements of a project from day one by getting input from all of the departments. So there was a lot of discussion over time. Where does this road connect? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? How do all of these interior roads work? Because we had many different configurations. But this road has always had to go along the power line easement because the power company needs those to be a conventional relationship to a road so that they can service them. They're right next to a road, just like a normal telephone pole is. So it was always a given that this was going to be, because we were connecting here, importantly, because we were connecting here for the first time, and the project in 1970 that was approved did not connect here. Okay, the neighbors principally wanted a new connection to Patterson, and we said from the outset, okay, we'll do that. That's fine. That's extra cost, but we'll do that. So it didn't dawn on anyone to make this a private road. First off, this is connecting two public roads, and so the premise was this will always connect. Does it have to connect from a access standpoint? Well, it sure should from a biking and walking standpoint, but you get into some funny grounds here if this is not a public street. And I mean, I'm standing here saying what the intentions are, but the homeowners 10 years from now say, hey, wait a second, we are bothered. If this is a private road, why are we taking this, all these people coming through? And so all of the logic is that this be a public street. If indeed the bike bridge is going to go over there, well, how are they going to go through do they really have a right to go through a private street to go over the bike bridge that exists because of the offer of dedication? So everything, we've got a 2006 memo of agreement with roads on what the road configuration is and what the road agreement between the project, and it says this will be a public road. Now, if this is an inaccessible public road, so be it, but we have an agreement with Public Works that said this is a public road. So our meeting from 2 days ago said, well, roads and fire like connections, but they've lived with this being a non optimum design right now for years. This has just been a dead end, and they've lived with that, and they haven't forced anyone to do a connection there. So our best thinking 2 days ago was, well, we're going to add connection by connection through the project, and then at the very end, after this whole thing is built out, then open this up, and people will have been walking and biking through this forever, and maybe it'll feel more normal. I think the reality is that these people are concerned that these people will come through here. Indeed, when these people live here, they may be concerned that this is such a neat street to drive on now that people will come. And so all of that is just perception, and you just don't know. I mean, you can't control people's perceptions. The reality, though, is the farther you get from this juncture, the more foolish it would be to go from here back through here to get out there. This road is going to be widened eventually. You're going to have the wide road, and it's going to be an easy way to get onto Patterson. So why people would take a circuitous route through there, I don't know. So the other facts relating to this is Larry Cavaletto was before the Board of Supervisors a long time ago, where there had been a 1 or 5 foot denial strip that prevented public roads being connected. And this is before my tenure, so it's more than 10 years ago. The supervisors eliminated that denial strip so that there was, in fact, ability to connect to that public road. And Jackie Cavaletto has said her grandkids come this way, and so why would they be doing anything that would threaten anyone who's going on this to the Berkeley Bridge? So that's the background on it, and we've tried to do the best we can with each set of facts and input, and so as of 2 days, I just want to go through what our best assessment is of how to handle this. So phase 1, there is indeed a new road that with a cul-de-sac. So we've added a cul-de-sac here, and this is a green area. This is not a through road. A cul-de-sac from the beginning and a new road. Fire likes that. Okay, there's only 22 units, 20 net as one stays and one gets replaced. And Fire says we're good with that. So on phase 2, there's a next increment of homes here, and the road through Avenida Pequeña gets built. So Fire says, okay, we're above the threshold where we want a second access here, and we're okay with that second access, and we don't need this here. We just don't need that. So we're good with this number of homes. We've got this circulation. We've got this circulation. So then the third phase is, okay, we create a new road out to Patterson, yet another new link in the neighborhood. So everyone here can get out here. And this was a late concession by us to do the affordable earlier rather than later. It would be logical to move from here to there, but county had concern about this being delayed too much. You have to start here because it's all leveraged off of the creek improvements, the homeowners association, the models will be here, so the core of it has to be here, and only time will tell how long it'll take to get out there. But so at this point you have this many units and you've got all of these road links, and you still don't have Merida connected. So the next installment is the fourth installment is filling in these homes in this area, and we're leaving the bigger lots for the last, thinking that this is all more market appropriate and at this point. So here we've got all of these links. Merida is not connected. We've got all these good links. We don't have a roundabout here anymore. We've got this link. Lots of connectivity. Fire's good with that. Roads is good with that. And then, I don't know how to, okay, on the fifth phase, so the fifth phase is adding homes up here. You've filled out the project, and then the premise of this variable is that this then gets paved and becomes a permanent connection. And people will have spent a considerable amount of time getting used to going out on Patterson before this gets in. This will be actually an impediment to a quick shot down here. So that was, I have to say, that's the collective wisdom of meeting kind of a compromise between all parties here. Whether this would stay green at the end, we're okay with that as long as this is a public road. I mean, you could have a justification for a public road because you got to get to the bike bridge. And you could have a justification for the public road because you got to get people down to the Berkeley Bridge here. So this really should be a public link, and I think project has no obligation to say, yeah, we'll have it a private road and we'll allow everyone an easement to get through here. That's an integral part of the community links here. So this is all, to us, it's all about making it a private road, and we're completely okay with really training everyone that, hey, let's use this route before this ever gets opened up. So to me, all of the rest of it is okay. And if this is a public road, then the only question is, do you open that at the very end or not? So that's our perspective on that. Going forward to as to construction access, I I suppose you could have, I was trying to think of what other solutions do you have. I mean, you're not going to have flagmen out there all the time because it's 5 guys coming in pickup trucks, a plumber and an electrician, et cetera, and it's not heavy equipment. You're not going to, the dirt is not being moved off site. The cut and fill is all happening on site. You don't have trucks lumbering down any road. They were concerned before about trucks lumbering down here with dirt in them, et cetera. So it's certainly plausible to have this as the designated spot and have that both in the conditions, and the conditions of approval are always part of people's contracts. You're making people's construction contracts buy into the conditions of approval, and if there's any violations, then it's on them, and if there's any penalties, then it's on them. So I think that is manageable and isn't the first time that issue has ever come up, I expect, in terms of being able to just make sure that's implemented. So the quick drawing by Flowers and Associates from the meeting from a couple days ago is to take out the roundabout at Las Perlas. So that's, and here we didn't have the detail quite on these bulb outs of how the bulb outs that have both landscaping and they have occasionally they have power poles. Not all of them have power poles, so that the parking areas are better defined on the street. And then their quick design of a bulb out would be like this. And I think in time this unit would be deleted from the project because you're taking. It might be more functional to have it go into here a little bit, and it would free up the planning of the open space here a little bit. But anyway, that's away from the area that the bike bridge is to go on. Here's the bike bridge location, and once again, the premise is that everything from here below would be green to start out with, except for the sidewalk and perhaps enough width for a bike. So that's what the quick end of, that was Will Robertson's suggestion that we do this at the bottom. So we met with staff. Key things are that development fees be paid by phase. He's discussed that. The nesting studies, and reading more about on the EIR this lunchtime, I see that while a nesting study has to be done, it could say that you only have a 25-foot buffer because animal or birds are used to this, or you'd have different buffers. So we're concerned about a uniform 500-foot buffer if there were nesting birds, but there isn't, so I'll pass on that. Construction timing, you heard about that one. Timing of Patterson improvements, and I'm going to start with the last point here first, because for some reason Caltrans and City of Goleta have never gotten together in the last 10 years to do this. And whether it's funding or whether there's some other things that we do not know about that have caused the problem, I know that a hang-up has been that Caltrans requires new meters, and there's been some hang-up on those meters between City of Goleta and Caltrans as the metering of the ramp. So the EIR has been going on for the last year and a half, analyzing that. We're not even an innocent bystander. We didn't even know what all the dialogue was on that, but there was a tremendous amount of dialogue amongst all those parties saying, okay, let's analyze that. And the restriping obviously works, the metering works, and here's the EIR, so you don't have any more environmental review for that important improvement. So so we assume that we are set to be able to do that. Do we trust that there won't be a hang-up? No. That's why we want to delay being able to go forward with phase one, because it's surprising how many things show up politically at the end. And so I would say to the City of Goleta and Caltrans, And they've had notice of all this. If they have any quarrel with what the EIR says, okay, this is going to happen, then they should speak now or forever hold their peace, because we do not want something about, oh, there is something else that we're not sure that is covered here. So anyway, so we'd file the application with Caltrans prior to the first zoning clearance. So right out of the gate, we're going to file the applications with Caltrans, and if necessary, City of Goleta, okay, here we go, these are the plans, please approve them. And that should be the responsibility of the project, but beyond that, we don't know how Caltrans will react. And so basically, so we've got to get Caltrans approval and start it, or get it approved before phase 2, completion of the improvements prior to phase 2 occupancy permits. So that was kind of the compromise on this. We have no reason to delay doing it because the I mean, it's worth doing. It's a benefit of the project, a sales benefit for the project too. So anyway, but we don't have any control after we file the necessary applications. And once again, the EIR says that the thing that triggers this is in fact the 48th, 49th unit, which trips you over the threshold for that intersection. So we don't want to avoid it. We just don't want to get hung up by other people not getting hung up in some other fashion here. So on the Goleta GTIP fee, which we only found out 3 days ago how much they were asking, which is $310,000 or so. The justification is that they're going to come back after we restripe the bridge to have 11-foot wide lanes, which there is at Las Positas, that they'll come back and widen the bridge by 2 feet so that those can be 12-foot lanes rather than 11-foot lanes. And they're not going to do that. That doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to make sense of why they say that's our story and we're sticking to it. I think it must be because their road fees are based on the premise they're going to do that. And so we're trying to have some logical connection to why we should pay them $310,000 to do that, and we have not heard that because I don't think they're going to do that. But and more, we're just trying to have a logical reaction to, okay, what are the conditions here? The condition 46, as originally written, had Tree Farm Lane being extended right at the beginning of the project, which is we just want to make a clarification that that's not happening. That's happening in phase 3. Those have been covered by Alex. So let's talk about affordable housing. This 10-year process of designing a project starts with the basic building blocks of, okay, how are the roads going to work out, and what is your target density? And our target density, which relates to what is the product type going to be, changed significantly over time. County asked us to add units. So we said, okay, well, we'll do that, and we'll see the best we can. Then so after the initiation, we got down to designing every single unit with every single kitchen, every single bedroom, every single courtyard on this space. And we lost unit after unit after unit. The second units, well, there was not anywhere close to the space to do any second units. And a critical thing as the housing market is plummeting is we cannot go mostly attached housing. Attached housing is anathema to lenders. It's a real problem doing attached housing. Everyone is trying to avoid it for a variety of reasons. So we have right now, other than the affordable, we have exactly the mix of attached and detached housing that you have on the resale market in Santa Barbara, which is 70% detached and 30% attached. We would not want to add more units so that we had, because they're all going to be attached units. So, and we had to abide by setbacks and limitations on the planning on the roads, et cetera. So we had to design the project first, and the housing element changes and changes and changes, and we don't know exactly how this is going to sort out. So we're trying to have as logical a base plan to be adaptable at the end. And our logical base plan was to have 24 garden apartments on the eastern end. So we felt that was a good foundation, and then the amount of inclusionary housing required under the county tripled from 2004 to now, so we couldn't come close to meeting the county inclusionary housing. And so we said, well, the only thing we can meet is the state bonus density. I mean, we can't pay in-lieu fees. The in-lieu fees for this project would be $12.7 million. And so all of the options under the current housing plan, county inclusionary, do not work. They don't come within 100 miles of working. So what works is some form of state bonus density. So what is the most practical way to do that is, well, we've got 24 units planned there. If we do 8 very low, then we are covered for the state bonus density, and we have flexibility on the other 16. And let's try to generate some revenue out of those. So we look around and see the city has this program where they're on a redevelopment agency site, they have for sale housing, and we're adaptable to how that would work out. So then near the end we said, well, we've got phasing, how we're going to do this, and we talked to Alex and Ann, and we say, well, we'll have 2 very low units in the first phase, 2 in the second phase, and they said, okay, that covers you for that. And then we get to the third phase, and basically we don't know whether it makes most sense to have rentals. I mean, whether it will at that time to have rentals. Maybe it will. The lender for this city project said if you hold them all in the same ownership, it'll disqualify the whole project from getting FHA financing because you can't have someone own more than 10% of the units. So we adapt and say, okay, well, that's when we adapt and say, well, wait a second, we need to split this into some sale and some rental. In-lieu fees, who knows if they'll be reasonable in the future, it's hard to say. But it's just like Merida. We've been just trying to do the best we can at each stage based on all the information and say, hey, this is our best thinking now. And the reality is the affordable housing is going to shake out before phase 3, where we're going to have to come back with a proposal and say, how about this? And the county will have done some new things on the housing element before that time. So if we had 3 options, that's fine. If we have just one option of the 8 very low, we know that covers us for the bonus density. That's okay, I guess. But we're just trying to continue to do things on ever shifting sand here, both economically and regulatory. So anyway, that's on the issues of homeowners' dues. That's a legitimate issue. I'm going to see if I can get back to the. Can you get back to the basic finished project? On homeowners' dues, there is a formula set by the Department of Real Estate on how homeowners' dues are assessed, and shockingly, attached units have higher homeowners' dues than the detached units do, because you have to have reserves for the exterior maintenance and the roofs of them, and the detached homes, the regular homes, have lower dues. So you have split dues that apply differently to different people, and there will probably be split dues even based on the extent to which they are using a private road here. So these people the garden apartments will not be using any private roads, so they won't have an assessment for the private roads. The apartments realistically are going to have to contribute if these people have right to the common area, which makes it even more a desperate loss situation for those loss leaner units. The best case, if all market considerations, you would have all of these owned so that people are invested in actually making a contribution for the homeowners association. If in fact the in lieu fees became reasonable, we would look at knocking out 12 units, because with 4.6 units per acre, the density of this project without any bonus density would be 120, so there'd be 12 fewer units. But all of that is shifting sand, and we don't know whether that is going to make sense 3 years hence, or the apartments, or the 8 in lieu. All of the rest of these units, anything that is owned will be paying homeowners dues with their assessment based on the reserves for them, and that's where the more reserves you have for this road, the less affordable the project becomes for everyone. And we weren't able to figure out what that amount is, but you have to pay a certain amount every month based on a projected amount to maintain and repave this periodically. So anyway, really the sum and substance of this is that we're doing the best we can, and there's different options that realistically will be reassessed on the affordable before it's actually built, however you condition it. Secondly, we really need this to be a public road, and it's fair that it be public road, and it's fair for everyone, I think, that it not be opened till the very end, and who knows when that'll be. And as to the other conditions, have largely shaken out through our conversations, I would say. So I think that's, if I didn't hit any points, I apologize, but one thing I meant to say was on the conditions, on the modifications, the idea of having the I think that's the last, yeah, there we go. The two modifications, number one, we designed the lots and the common area some years ago, and when we didn't know what the affordable solution was going to be, and Ann Elmy said years ago, you design the best project you can, and then let's find what the proper zoning is. And that's what we did. And then we found a zoning that basically works. The DR 4.6 works. So we weren't shooting for 40%. We were shooting for an optimum plan, and we were 38.5% open space. On the location of the homes along Tree Farm Lane, we're doing this sophisticated application for lead neighborhood design, and shockingly, the houses were not close enough to the street to qualify. That you have to create a more walkable environment. They want the houses closer to the streets, almost like you see in cities, places where people walk all the time. So we could tell Alex a couple of years ago, hey, we want to move them towards the street, and it's a benefit of moving away from neighbors too. So those have always been just good design issues, as opposed to incentives for bonus density. And bonus density incentives are supposed to make a project more feasible, and we've got about 8 things that we're paying that we've agreed to pay that we're not paying, and we haven't tried to use an incentive on any of those. So anyway, we're just trying to, with the modifications, we're just trying to do good planning. Thank you.
Mr. Chair. I have one question. With regard to the statement there that we have not designated incentives, that was the other half. When you said you'd like the 2 variations that you've mentioned so far to be part of good design but not be designated under the affordable or the housing density bonus. So when do you get to designate your incentives, and what would they be? I'm a little uncomfortable just going blind on that.
Well, we don't have any in mind. We basically, issue by issue, we are where we are because where we are through the process. And so we requested an incentive in another project and it was denied. So the incentive thing hasn't really fit in the county yet, but certainly the modifications we're seeking were absolutely design based before we even talked about it being a bonus density project.
I have a question.
Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking about this the last bullet point. If there is going to be a roundabout or whatever the determination is, and you eliminate that one home, you probably will meet that 40% requirement.
Well, it's a big site, so whatever.
Maybe not.
What
Okay.
1.5% of 26 acres is, it's
Okay.
whatever that calculation is.
All right. Then my other
Yes.
question to you is, again, I'm referring back to the staff memorandums for your initiation hearings, where there is a comment for both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors that there is a new through road that would connect with Patterson Avenue and reduce traffic on other neighborhood roads. So it would once again seem that we're shifting in terms of what you had originally considered during this initiation hearing. Is that?
Well, the new connection to Patterson is happening. It's just not. It's happening. It's not happening at the beginning because it's so distant from the improvement.
No, but the comment was, and reduce traffic on other neighborhood roads. With the connection to Merida, it's not reducing the traffic on other neighborhood roads.
when that goes through, I believe it'll take a lot of traffic from Sunrise Village and Cathedral Point. Probably not Cathedral Point, but Sunrise Village and Cova. That is a more logical way to get on Patterson. So you're taking some other traffic, not from this project, and getting it onto that road, I think. So I think that is going to be the reality of it.
And my question, I guess, on that slide on the city of Goleta
Yes.
that you had, I guess I have some concerns. I'm not sure because there's just seems to be some sort of disconnect between you and the city in terms of information you're receiving. And are there any legal issues, County Council, with? I mean, I don't even know how to frame the question, but just in terms of Mr. Nelson's comments concerning that he didn't feel he had to be paying this fee, that's between them and him, is that not? It's not. We're not. The county's not in any way involved with that.
It's a county condition right now that we pay the fees.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, it is a condition and it was actually a mitigation measure in the EAR to reduce the project's contribution to cumulative impacts at that intersection.
Okay.
So if we were to pull it out,
No, I'm not
then we would have a Class 1 cumulative impact at that intersection.
I just have, it's just the inquiry is because of the way that Mr. Nelson either frames the question or the issue, that the issue is, and it wasn't my understanding when I talked to Steve Wagner in the city about this, the right turn from Patterson. It was more about the ramp and the construction on the ramp that. But I don't know. I don't.
Well, I can assure you our information on this is pretty scarce.
Okay,
I mean, it's
right.
sparse, and so
We're all
we're trying to
different.
assess it. It's
Right.
we got
Okay.
an email from Mr. Wagner to Alex forwarded to us yesterday or the day before, so we're
Right.
trying to
Thank you.
assess it as best we can.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, thank you, Chair. With the new proposal for affordable housing, originally when we heard the project, you were going to have some rentals, I guess, in phase one. So as I understand it now, there would be no units for the very low units, and even the workforce units would not go in until phase three? Or
No, I'm sorry. We did not portray that correctly here.
Maybe I misunderstood
There will
it.
be
Yeah.
two very low-income rental units in phase one, and then there will be two very low rental units in phase two, and those will be units in a triplex where there are three separate townhomes, and so those So, and then those will have an opportunity to be replaced by new units in the third phase. But there will be 2 units in the first phase and in the second phase, each.
And those will be coming from the west to Las Perlas for access and egress.
Yes, those are in the same clustered location as the rest of them in phase 1.
Okay. Commissioner Blau, anything for Mr. Nelson?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, great. Well, Mr.
Bob-
Flowers?
Yes. Yes. Well, get him to put the slide in.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon again,
This
Chairman.
is,
I'm Bob Flowers.
Right.
And I met at the previous meeting, but Chair Valencia, members of the commission, I'd like to address just one aspect in support of, and perhaps clarify Mr. Nelson's explanation. If we could put up, well, it has to do with this, but if we could put up the overall project slide, I think I can just use that to explain it. There we go, that's good enough. At our meeting we had with staff, planning and fire and public works, major discussions of a lot of alternatives, and what we came up with is physically the plan, but the implementation of it I think is significant. Mr. Nelson went through the phases as they would be introduced and constructed. And there's some options there. We discussed, for instance, removal of this. I mean, that might be a variable that the commission would consider because that is kind of a beautification thing. Traffic-wise, it would probably work out more smoothly to just leave this roundabout. However, we as a consensus discussed leaving that. That would leave, and you saw the planting or the layout, there's quite a bit of planting on that intersection. The more significant thing we talked about is what's been introduced here, which is a roundabout, and as Jeff explained it, it can be modified. Perhaps what we need to do here, assuming what happens today at this commission meeting is favorable, prior to the board, we'd have a solidification of the plans. We just didn't have enough time to make modifications. But the concept here, and maybe we can go to Unit 1, Alex, or Phase 1. So the Phase 1 improvements, as you see them here, involve these roads. They aren't colored in, but these roads would all go in. This would be proposed to be dedicated as a public road, including this roundabout, with all the original aspects of the project as we proposed them. This piece here, which would remain green, would be on the first final map, would be offered to the county for acceptance. And the county would retain that option throughout. It could remain green forever, but it's going to be the county's decision to whether this physical connection is made in the future. It's similar to this connection that exists, actually it's right here, exists here today. That 40 years ago, that was offered for dedication. The county holds the power on that, whether or not to accept it as a public street. Because in those days, there was, as we talked, there was a master plan to connect these all the way through here. So what we've proposed, you know, standing back and looking at this, seems to basically solve the problems, the objections to making a physical connection here. We can still have public easements. We can still make a water line, sewer, utility connections without a lot of duress with all the different rules we have. And we can still maintain this, which is the same situation as a public street. So to me, we've come up with, you know, there's some compromises here, but it seems to me to solve the neighbor's problem, and it also allows the project to proceed in some reasonable manner without adjusting fees and having conflicts in the future over access and so forth on a private street. So that's kind of our, to try to clarify our proposal.
Thanks, Mr. Flowers. We have 6 public speaker slips, and I would propose that we start with the public speakers after a 5-minute break, we've been going for an hour and a half, an hour and 45. And so let's stretch our legs and come back, and we'll start right away at 10 to 4. Thank you.
Area, and now our first speaker will be Eva Inbar, followed by Mace Madisonian.
Good afternoon, Chair Valencia and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Eva Inbar, and I'm on the board of the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation, or COAST, and I help coordinate the Safe Routes to School project, and I've been involved in such projects for over 10 years now. I'm here to urge you to include in this project as a required mitigation a bike bridge across San Jose Creek to connect this new residential project with Kellogg Drive and the San Jose Creek bike path on the other side. I think this would have a direct impact on taking out car trips, so it's a traffic mitigation, and it's a greenhouse gas emission mitigation. Both of these are directly connected with this project. It would directly serve this new neighborhood in having a shortcut to the other side. And there's an elementary school on the other side, and that concerns me in particular. And with 137 units here, there will be a substantial number of elementary school kids in this neighborhood. I would estimate about half of these might have kids, so we're talking 70 kids here. So that is 70 peak hour trips that could be shifted to a bike trip, from car to bike trip. So that is a direct mitigation here, and I urge you to include that. We have evidence in the Safe Routes to School movement that this kind of shortcut is among the most effective ways to reduce car trips to a school and increase bike trips. And it makes sense. What would you do? If you had a shortcut and you can walk or bike, that's what you use. So I have 2 case studies here that I can offer. One is from Kilmer Middle School, and I wrote about that in my letter in Fairfax County, Virginia, where bike trips increased by 30 from 5 to about 45 after they installed this kind of shortcut bridge. That's the key. It's that it's a shortcut that really is effective. And there's another middle school. This one is in Arizona. It's called Rio Rico Middle School in Santa Cruz County, where between an existing neighborhood and a middle school, a similar bike bridge was installed, and bike trips went from 5 before to 18 after. Now these we're talking here, these are new families, so they're setting new habits. So this is a perfect time. So conditions could not be better for shifting car trips to bike trips, car trips that haven't even been taking place. People are not in the habit yet of driving there. So these conditions are as good as they get. So I'm really urging you to give this serious consideration. It would help if you had it in your maps. I haven't even been seeing it. Maybe there's something I missed, that the bridge wasn't even included in the maps, but I would really urge you to give this serious consideration to make this a condition of approval. I think you would really have a very strong effect for a good bang for the buck, let's say. I'm aware it's not cheap, but this is a very effective mitigation.
Thank you very much. Mace Madisonian, followed by Ellen Marshall.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Mace Matiosi, and I live in the neighborhood. And I have a question about the very low-income housing. I had heard that there was not going to be an on-site manager based on the amount of units. And I would be concerned who would be monitoring a very low housing situation, like a very low-income situation like that, as to how many residents were occupying those rentals. I say that from experience in our neighborhood on University Drive. There was a house. It was not a rental, but there were, when I say multiple families there, I mean, it got out of control. Luckily, the house sold recently and it's being rehabbed, but that is a concern. Another concern is the opening or the delayed opening of the road from Patterson Avenue. As these units get built in phases, the traffic that's going to be going back to those homes, albeit not construction traffic, will be taking probably Agana or coming in off of Cathedral Oaks. And at some point, I think, you know, Patterson needs to be opened up before, I don't know what phase it was, but it was one of the later phases. That should be, you know, considered to be opened up right away and get those people used to going in that direction. In regards to Merida, Mr. Nelson continues to try to justify, you know, why that should not, why it should be open in face of, you know, pretty complex neighbor opposition. And, you know, he can say whatever he wants about it, but if the plan isn't to open it until phase 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever it was down the line, and it could go that long without being open, what's the point of opening at that point? I mean, you know, to try to suppose what people are going to do coming and going as justification for why that should be open doesn't make sense. And I honestly think that there will be more than 5 trucks with guys in pickup trucks coming to build this site. And, you know, that comment to me is an insult to the neighborhood. There's going to
Thank you very
be
much.
plumbing, concrete, lumber, roofing. It's going to be a lot of traffic. So let's just face the facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ellen Marshall, followed by Jared Katz.
Good afternoon. I'd just like to comment. I couldn't understand, and luckily Mr. Nelson pointed out, why the county is asking for more housing on a rather tiny site. I mean, it appears to me that if you look at that and then you actually look at the aerial view of the houses surrounding it, this, you know, it's about 3 times as dense as anything around. And I don't understand that, why they are asking for more homes. It would be aesthetically much nicer if there was less homes. And the other thing is that no mention has been made. I think the tree farm has been closed for what, 10 years? Somebody said around 10 years? Almost 10 years. And nothing has been mentioned about the animal habitat or the vermin that now live on the tree farm. What is going to happen when they start to break ground? All of that vermin will find its way into the neighbouring gardens and houses. Everything, and this is surrounded by other houses. And I don't think anybody has paid any attention to what might happen to other people's houses and gardens in and around that area. And lastly, I think that for a site of that size with that many houses, I think 1 swimming pool and 6 or 7 other small buildings is pretty mediocre. 135 houses, 300 people, pretty mediocre for 1 60-foot swimming pool. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Jared Katz, followed by Nicole Katz.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Jared Katz, and I live at 438 Merida. I'm on the corner of Toltec and Merida, across from the Greenbelt. And I'm here to speak specifically on the issue of Merida Drive. And I'm going to ask and urge that you adopt, as between the 2 options, option 1, which is to eliminate the extension, and reject option 2, which is to delay the extension. On Merida Drive and in the neighborhood, we feel very strongly about this issue. These are issues of quality of life, safety, and the integrity of the neighborhood. We think the proper course is to require there be a cul-de-sac, not a road extension. Merida Drive is a quiet, idyllic street. You've heard about it now over the course of several hearings. It's not a main throughway, and it's not acceptable to us who live there for it to become one for the benefit of this project. We don't think that option 2, the alternative of opening Merida Drive after the 5th phase, is acceptable, because the whole point is that we don't want it opened. And that's merely delaying the inevitable, and it's just putting off in time the increased traffic flow, increased safety risks that we want to avoid. You've heard from the county and from fire, from Public Works, and even from Mr. Nelson. It's not necessary to open up Merida for this project to go through. There's other sufficient access points for residents to drive in and out. It's not necessary for emergency vehicles like fire. They just require a cul-de-sac to turn around. And to go between neighborhoods, it's not necessary. If people want to go, who live in the new neighborhood and visit people in University Circle, we have Las Perlas. We'll have a place under option 1 for pedestrian traffic and for bike traffic. We don't need cars driving down that way, and it doesn't significantly help traffic flow or connectivity to open it up at the end of phase 5. As the previous speaker said, if the people are going to be in there and through the first 4 phases get used to going out Treefar Lane to Patterson, that's going to be sufficient. And even Mr. Nelson said that the people in the back who are moving into the homes built at the beginning of phase 1 are going to get in the habit of going right out Treefar Lane to Patterson. They don't need to change after years at the end of construction to go out Merida. It's a less efficient route. There is precedent in our neighborhood for not opening up Merida, and I'll give you 3 instances, all of which were done not to serve connectivity but to preserve the safety and quality of life on Merida Drive. One is the footbridge at Berkeley. That originally was going to be a road. A road, of course, would improve connectivity by car, but it's not. For safety and quality of life reasons, it's a footbridge. 2, the south end of Merida, where Moravia is, that could connect for connectivity purposes to Calle Real, and it doesn't, again, for quality of life reasons. And 3, the Orchard Park development, Harvard Lane abuts it. That ends in a cul-de-sac. It doesn't connect through to the project or to Calle Real. So having already taken these steps to preserve the quality of life on Merida in the neighborhood, it doesn't make sense to go backwards and open up the north end of Merida. That's a step back, and it's against the entrance of the current residents of University Circle. So it doesn't make sense to do this now. It's an unfair balancing to benefit the new project for people who don't even live there yet, and to put the burden on the people who have bought into this neighborhood wanting to have this quiet, peaceful neighborhood where the children can play in the streets. And this could easily be a point of compromise. I mean, we can have this closed as a point of compromise and to get past this issue.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
That is my closing. I appreciate your time, and I'd urge you again to go to option 1.
We have a question.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Katz, are the neighbors aware of this alternative or possible compromise that Mr. Flowers was explaining at the end of his presentation with the roundabout and then dedicating the green space that would be between to the county and not doing the 2 cul-de-sacs?
Sure, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I heard it for the first time today, so I don't know.
Thank you, Commissioner Brooks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nicole Katz, followed by Gloria Peyrat.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm the one that broke into tears almost last time, so I'm going to try to keep it together. I appreciate your time and listening to us. I appreciate very much the options you have presented, and I would just urge you please to go with option 1. It's the best for our neighborhood. I want you to know I'm representing lots of mothers who could not be here today, who had to pick up their children from school. They asked that I speak on their behalf. And we are all very concerned with Merida. I think, Commissioner Brooks, you asked about the roundabout. As my husband said, we were not aware of that option until today, but I think it still allows a connection, which we would just say we do not want any connection of any form whatsoever. Like my husband said, it seems ridiculous to wait until the end of this and then open it up. Let's just not open it at all. We don't have to spend any more time on the issue. And as to Mr. Nelson's question, why would people come through this area? I can attest, I've lived in this area for 5 years. People want a quick, easy access to Patterson. Traffic is bad on Patterson. It's going to get a lot worse with this development. You're giving them a straight access right down Merida to Parejo, past my house, past my neighborhood, past my park, and past my neighbor's park. And he wonders why they're going to come through. You can, I don't have a pointer here, but they're going to have a direct access. Everybody on the west side of this project, if you open up Merida, they're not going to go through Tree Farm Lane to Patterson, go down. They're going to come ripping down Merida Drive to Parejo to get on to Patterson. And I'm sorry if I'm a little angry, but this is my neighborhood and I feel very strongly about it. So that's why they're going to use that connection. Okay, so let's just keep it closed so that it isn't opened at all. This object of connectivity I find also to be lacking. I have friends obviously in all the neighboring villages, Sunrise Village, Cathedral Points Village. We're all friends. We all obviously know each other. Our children know each other, but I don't drive through their streets and I don't endanger their children. We have our own set of road system for each neighborhood, and I think you please respect that in this case. Obviously, I'm very active on the Kellogg PTA board for the last 4 years, and I instituted a program called Bow Wow, which is Bike on Wednesday, Walk on Wednesday. I worked with Eva Enbar, who is here, and Coast, and we're working to keep this neighborhood safe. There's a walking school bus that leaves from that Berkeley Bridge every Wednesday, and about 10 to 20 kids walk to Kellogg School that way every Wednesday, and you're putting them directly in harm's path by opening up Merida. I worked hard on that, and I'm proud of it, and we have a lot more bikers and walkers in this neighborhood. And opening Merida, you're putting them directly in harm's way. So as a member of Kellogg PTA, as a member of this neighborhood, as a former Safe Routes to School advocate, I did that for 2 years through Coast. I worked with Eva Embar and others to promote biking and walking, and extending Merida, opening it up, is going to do just the contrary, because you're going to have cars whipping down that street to get to Parejo and to Patterson. So I would urge you to please, please consider option 1. It's the best thing for our neighborhood and the best thing for our children. There are over, I'm sorry, am I at the end of my time? There are over 50 kids in that neighborhood alone that I can count, just school-age children, and a lot more being born, a lot more in preschool. I have 3 children myself, ages 11, 8, and 5, and I know their safety is worth it, so I thank you for your consideration.
Okay. Would you please outline the villages that you indicated with your marker, the marker there?
Oh, here, you mean the neighboring villages of Sunrise, I don't know how to use this, I'm sorry. Sunrise Village is right here. Obviously, they use their own roads. They have the private roads. Up above it is Cathedral Point Village, all maintaining their own roads, access in and out of the neighborhoods. And then Cathedral Oaks Village, I'm sorry, across right here. All 3 villages with lots of children, and they maintain their own roads and access in and out. I would urge this new development to be similar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Gloria? And followed by Mark Munich.
Hello, I'm Gloria Payrat, and I live at 426 Merida, which is right on the corner of Merida and Toltec. And I read your report on the impact of this project, and I disagree with a lot of the sentences where it says there's no significant impact on Merida. In fact, you contradict yourself when you say that there's not going to be an impact, and yet you anticipate traffic going through our street to alleviate the traffic problems. So you have a contradiction in both your report and how it's been presented by Mr. Nelson. We've lived there on Merida for 34 years. One of the reasons we bought it was the beauty of the green belt, the fact that there was no through traffic over the bridge, crossing Merida, and the 2 dead ends at the end. And so we've raised our children there, and we want to age in place there, and we anticipate walking continually on Merida, hopefully. And if there's increased traffic, we are concerned about safety. We have a lot of elderly people in the neighborhood, as well as a lot of young people, and it's really a wonderful mix. We have dog owners galore there. We have young children, as Mrs. Katz has said. And, right now I look on the street and our neighbor boys are playing in the street. Mrs. Katz's children have learned to ride their bikes in the street. We have all kinds of things happening on our street because it's relatively free of traffic at this time. The traffic that I do see and hear are some of the younger people going around my corner to Toltec and screeching, and they're going fast. And I well know, and if you are a car driver in our neighborhood, you know the access to Patterson. When you go up University to get to Patterson, you immediately at the traffic hours have this backup. So what I do instead of turning on Patterson to go to the traffic light to try and get to the freeway is I take an easier route, which is crossing Patterson over to the other university and going over to Turnpike. And that's what people in this neighborhood, the new division, will do. Instead of going to the places you anticipate, they're going to go down Merida. And that will increase the traffic there. And anyone who's driven in the area and knows how to avoid as much congestion as they can will find the easiest route, and Merida is the easiest route. So we strongly, in all the neighborhoods, believe me, I've talked and our neighbors have talked, and we are all opposed. There's nobody who wants Merida open, and that's a large neighborhood. So we do urge you to consider that, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mark Bunich, followed by Chris Baxter.
Thank you for listening to me, Commissioners. My name is Mark Munch. I was born in Santa Barbara, and I've lived the last 43 of my 45 years on 5483 Toltec Drive. Actually, I went to college for 10 years of that and then bought my parents' home. So I know the neighborhood. Actually, there's about 168 homes along all the streets that go up from Merida over to Patterson. And if you look at all those homes, one of the things I've realized in traffic patterns over the years in my neighborhood is that people see a straightaway and they go faster. And so if you look at Merida, it's actually a pretty straight line all the way down to the last street.
Can you use a marker to show that? You got the marker there in front of you.
Right here. That's the pen. No, that's your pen.
It's got a press the button and it.
All right, there we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks. So,
where is the straight line?
Right about here.
Flip it around. Pointing towards you.
Nope. It was pointing the right way, but sorry. Right there, thank you. You can see the straight line Cecilia's pointing out, thank you for that. And it goes all the way down there in a pretty straight line, and so it'd be pretty easy, my point is, that people can pick up speed on that road. And in addition to that, there's some other issues. One is the concern of the density of the housing. I think it's quite dense, as somebody else pointed out. There's quite a few units inside that small area. And I know that all those people will have their own schedules and times to do things, and I believe that the easiest access is straight out to Patterson. That looks like a no-brainer. I'm not quite sure why opening Merida up was even a consideration, especially if the fire department doesn't demand it or any other city entity. The other question I have is in regards to the open space, and I'm wondering if it's been brought up to anybody that there is a space just north going up to Cathedral Oaks that could be used as a walkway. And I'm wondering, Commissioner Cecilia Brown, if you could point that out just to the north, right up there. Yes, correct. It would be on the east side of the creek, and if there's any space up there to go straight to Cathedral Oaks, I know that that's an easy way to get out of the location as well. All right, so thank you for listening, and once again, I urge you to opt for option 1, which is keeping Merida closed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris Baxter, followed by our last speaker, Dan Baxter.
Good afternoon. I'm actually Dan Baxter.
You're Dan Baxter, okay.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I've been a resident of the neighborhood for over 20 years. I was here last week. I have 2 kids, a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. I have 3 main points today. My first point is that I agree with everyone else here to keep Merida Drive closed. I think that's a special neighborhood, special place, and we need to protect that. My second major point, is there a laser pointer I can use, or is it not working? Okay, so I have a major problem with the construction traffic in the neighborhood. To me, here's the 101 freeway, and here's Patterson Avenue. And if a construction truck was traveling north on Patterson Avenue, the logical path for entry to the site would be straight through the center of the project. Right off of Patterson, straight through the center. You wouldn't disturb any neighbors. They could have their trucks go in and out all day long, and we wouldn't have hundreds of people angry about this. So to me, that should be the number 1 choice. That's the only logical option. Everyone I talk to says the same thing. Why is construction not going down the gut of the project here? Why would a truck go all the way up north, back west, and then through the neighborhoods into the project? It seems messy. Why would they go down Agana and up into Merida or Las Perlas? The logical path is you get off the freeway, you go north, up, the site touches Patterson, right down the center. Seems pretty simple to me. My third major point, and if we could bring up the slide that has phase 2, I need to bring up something that's a new issue. I live in the Homeowners Association, Cathedral Oaks Village Association. It's called, otherwise short, it's called COVA. We're adjacent, we're right here. We're 22 acres adjacent to the site. In phase 2, I've noticed, and this is brand new, well, we're showing phase 3, but this road here is opening up and supposed to cut through our development, COVA, on this private road to Avenida Pequeña. And we object, as the COVA members, to any use of that road for construction traffic. This is a new issue, I guess. I've just seen this to me. So I want to make sure that we're very clear that we don't want any construction traffic using the private road during the construction process. So that's very, very important. We have 50 homes. I have a letter that the board of directors has sent, and I emailed it to everyone. We've got kids, we've got old people. This is not a road intended for construction use. So that's very, very important that we get an answer to that issue and make sure that that's not used for construction. You know, Commissioner Brooks, you brought up a very good point earlier, in that you said you wanted to make sure that this project has community benefits. And that's a great point. I'd like to remind you guys that, you know, the people here, we are the community. I rode my bike to school this morning with 7 kids from the neighborhood. We did Bow Wow Day, which is a great project. It's called Bow Wow Day. All the kids ride their bike to school. And having construction traffic coming through the neighborhood is going to be a disaster. I mean, I've got 6 kids I was taking, not my kids, but we had 6 or 7 kids riding to school today. The construction traffic's, to me, the only logical path is through the center of the project, and we've got a nice compromise. Everybody's happy, the neighborhood's happy, and I still get to do Bow Wow Day, and that's what we'll look forward to. So thanks for the time.
Thank you very much. Chris Baxter. Chris, I called you first, but Dan took the spot, so
he's edging me out of everything in my life. Chris Baxter is the name. I live on Merida Drive. Thank you so much for listening to us today. Can I just say that I don't know if anyone, I haven't met anyone actually that's against the project. I think everybody, you know, most everybody knows Mr. Cavaletto. He's lived a long and beautiful life. He deserves to see his project come to fruition. I think what everybody's griping about, and it's actually just crazy making, why we just can't put this to rest, is the traffic issue. It's important to everybody. Everybody has their little life going on, and we don't want it disrupted. Mr. Nelson made some, you know, points about the benefits of opening Merida, but you know, all the benefits together don't add up to wrecking the adjacent neighborhood. It doesn't make any sense. To the other point about precedent, I was here, I don't do this often, I was here 15 years ago with the Maravilla project. I don't know, you're all familiar with it, I'm sure. Exact same scenario, except on the other side of Merida. The builders there, we went eyeball to eyeball with them, their representatives, and they said, no problem, we'll close Merida. And lo and behold, look at that place. It's absolutely gorgeous. The architecture, design, everything about it. I didn't see him build it. I didn't hear him build it. I don't even see it now. It's just beautiful. They did a terrific job. And our neighborhood was not impacted. The other issue everyone speaks about is, why is Patterson not opened up from the get-go? The Patterson and Tree Farm Lane. It seems like that is a really logical answer to all the construction craziness. Just right from the beginning, just go right down the middle of it and problem solved. Thank you for listening to us. It's very important to us, and we appreciate your help with this.
Thank you very much.
We urge you to vote for option 1.
Thank you.
May I ask one quick question?
Absolutely.
There was a reference by Mr. Flowers about, it seemed like, I'm not sure if it was another option about the a green belt thing between the two. Was that a separate option, or was that one of these two options?
We don't know. We'll get that answered by the staff.
Okay, I think I think people just don't want cars. If it was a deal where there was a green belt or we're mingling, bike paths, whatever, absolutely acceptable. But we just don't want cars. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Was there anybody else who wanted to speak that hasn't brought a slip forward? All right, if not, we'll close the public hearing. It's time for a rebuttal. Mr. Cavallero, Mr. Nelson, whoever is going to speak. And I hope that you response to the opening of Christmas Tree or Tree Farm Lane, why that isn't going to be the major entry.
Well, when the full road is developed, it'll be a two-way road. If you go to phase 3, then that'll be the obvious place for construction traffic, and that's about halfway through the project. And before then, if roads would allow left turn lanes onto the existing 15-foot wide road and allow one way in the morning and one way out in the afternoon, we could do that. It's the road is there. We've talked about we would pave actually that the one way, the 15-foot wide road, and we could do it. Could have part of the construction contract one way in, one way out, but I don't know that roads will allow us to make a left turn here. And once again, that connection is here through here. If they say, yes, you can have a left turn, then that's fine. We're talking about adding 100 feet of unpaved area, which is right here, in connection with that, if indeed we use that. Roads is not thrilled with that because it doesn't meet all of their specs. It would be a private road that'd be used for construction. We could do that if roads said you can do that. But I think the issue is whether they want people taking left turns in there in the morning. It certainly would be easy to say have the construction traffic could go out that way. But it's a big deal to make it a wider road than it is because it's significant grading and taking out oak trees, et cetera. So we had gone through with the use of this road on an interim basis in the last hearing, and we won't, but I mean, subject to road saying yes or no on that, I mean, we'd be okay with that.
Mr. Robert? We were going to interrupt you. You still have time on your rebuttal.
Right.
Mr. Robertson, how could we affect that?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, thank you. I just remember, I think we heard from the fire chief at the last hearing, and he didn't want anybody making left-hand turns from Patterson to the project because it was not a safe movement since there's no center lane. It was actually the fire department that I think objected to the entry being there for now. He said it would be okay if it was right-hand turn in only and right-hand turn out only. He was happy with the fire truck being able to make a left-hand turn because you're supposed to be 300 feet behind the fire truck. But for a car, it was a dangerous movement. I'm just reminding you of his testimony last week.
Thank you so much for that. And we have the fire department here. We'll have them testify after Will Robertson. Mr. Robertson?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I apologize. I had to step out for a second for a phone call. If the question was why would Public Works not allow a one-lane road onto Patterson, there are several reasons. One of them is compliance. It's hard to enforce a one-way road off of Avenida Pequeña. Public Works stance has always been that if you're going to put a road there, make it a two-lane road, because otherwise it will become a two-lane road no matter how you have it signed. 15-foot wide is not appropriate for two-way traffic, and unless there's a physical barrier to prevent cars from going one direction or the other, it will behave as a two-lane road. Secondly, Tree Farm Road is accessing Patterson, which is a major arterial, and as stated at the last hearing, that road does not have center left-hand turn lanes. So any car traveling northbound towards Cathedral Oaks in the number 1 fast lane wanting to turn into the project site would create a severe opportunity for a rear-end collision. Not only that, cars coming southbound as well, there's just, you have the potential for another rear-end collision without either a right turn decel lane or just people not anticipating cars, let's say, coming out of that one-way road when somebody's trying to go in. So there's a number of operational reasons why Public Works would not want that to be anything other than a two-way road. However, we would support a right-in, right-out option. However, the road would still need to be wide enough to support two-way traffic.
And after the project is complete, will there be the ability to make a left turn, or that still will not be possible?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we've worked extensively with the applicant for improvements along Patterson on what would be necessary. And the last time I looked, it does allow for left turns, turn pockets, as well as proper frontage improvements. I know the question was asked last time, is it going to include sidewalk? Yes, it will include sidewalk, and 2 lanes in each direction.
So the easement is wide enough to include a left turn pocket?
Yes, it
collector?
Is. Yes.
All right, thank you.
It would not allow for the center median, landscape median as currently exists on the northern portion, but there is enough room for a left turn pocket.
Can I have the fire department come up, please? Mr. Nelson, you still have rebuttal time. We're getting some questions answered here. Yes, thank you. Could you tell us what restrictions you have on a left turn going north? Please identify yourself for the.
Dwight Pepin with County Fire. I wasn't at the last meeting. Captain Fiddler was here, but I did discuss the project in depth with him, and I was at the meeting on Monday. I don't believe it was ever a condition of the fire department to restrict any turning on that. The one requirement that we did have, though, was that it needed to be a 2-lane road, at least 20 feet wide. A one-way road's not acceptable with us. There also, maybe you could clarify, they were talking about a temporary construction road entrance, and then, you know, the permanent road there, and there were, you know, different requirements for both of those. But as far as the turning, we, as far as I know, had no restrictions to that, and Brian was here, he didn't remember that either.
Brian?
Council members, we concurred to what Public Works was saying. It would create a safety situation, but that's not our jurisdiction to allow or disallow that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Of course, it creates a left turn hazard for the speed of traffic coming south on Patterson, and for a rear end collision possibility going north.
So then there
it's
is a
not condition of the
possibility,
project.
there is a possibility that there could be a left turn pocket. It's just a matter of the project doing it. And that is, the easement is there, there's enough property in the easement to create that pocket. Who would pay for that pocket while that 20-foot street was made there on Christmas Tree Lane?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, the roadway improvements that have been discussed with the applicant would be covered under standard frontage improvements to serve the property. Therefore, the applicant would be responsible for those
So
costs.
eventually, he would have to pay for them.
That is correct.
Whether it's up front now or later.
Yes.
That answers a lot of the questions, and we now have more information. Thank you very much, both, for coming in and giving us that information. Mr. Nelson, would you like to continue with your rebuttal?
Yes, we have been at this for 10 years, and every good idea that people have come up with, we said, okay, yeah, let's try that and see if it works. And so we have tried to adapt to every bit of input along the way. We're part of an existing road grid, and what part we get to use and what part we don't use at different times is subject to debate, and we're just trying to adapt to that. That it seems like the construction traffic coming from the north until the road is through to Patterson is the most logical. It seems like we could continue to work with roads and fire department to look at just construction access, because it seems to me there are a lot of sites that have construction access that's independent of permanent accesses, and that they don't meet all standards because the fire department is not going to go through them, and you're not going to have heavy traffic. But the reality is that we do have a 15-foot wide stretch there that if roads felt like if construction vehicles could access it in some way, rather than looking at it as a standard of what fits for a permanent road, then it seems like we could continue to have that dialogue. But as far as the basic elements of the project, we've done everything we can to create it being as connected or not connected as you want it to be. Bob Flower's point was well said about that's an offer of dedication. The county can accept it or not accept it to Merida. And so we did good planning up to that point. It's then in the county's hand. We did get good planning to give the county an opportunity to do a bike bridge. We did an EIR. It's up to the county on what it does next. So we've done the best we can to have a good plan that fits with whatever the latest demands are. And it seems to me the issue of just purely construction traffic over a 15-foot wide paved road might get a different view if they looked at as that rather than the residents of the neighborhood or anyone else using it. And so I don't know that I think that perhaps, and anyway, we have a link available if it worked out for fire department and roads on that.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson, all the people that come here since we've started having these meetings, they all praise Mr. Cavaletto and his project. So they all like your project. They have two problems. One with Merida, which is easy to solve, and the second one with that opening to Patterson there. I mean, there's a big message there. And with that, go to Commissioner.
Great. I just had a question for Mr. Robertson. If you had this road just for construction, how would you limit it just to construction? Because ultimately, until the final road is put in phase 3, there'll be people living in the western end, and they could very well use that construction road. I don't know if they want to, but they could. So how would you limit it to just that? It wouldn't be...
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, I think it's kind of a two-step process here. I think for construction traffic only, being its private property, the applicant could easily gate the access road between Avenida Pequeña and Patterson and open it during construction hours and close it after construction hours. However, that does not help the residents that would be living in the West End, and it's quite clear if it was gated, then those residents would have to use Agana to Avenida Pequeña or Cathedral Oaks to the same road. So it would not help the residents that are currently living in there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robertson and the fire department. With that, we'll bring it back to staff. Does staff have any other comments before it comes to the commission?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, no. We don't.
All right, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Commissioners? Commissioner Brooks, I think you're light.
Yes, thank you.
Beat the light.
I think while we have roads and fire here, when Mr. Cavaletto took me over to the temporary road, and I know where it is, and he explained to me some of the concerns that you had. My concern is that if it became the construction road, it is very, very close to about 6 homes there. I guess it's, I don't know, is that on Agana or one of the cul-de-sacs? So that would make me think, why not just put the road in? Put Tree Farm Lane in? I mean, rather than spending the money to improve, again, I know it's paved somewhat, the little side road that we're looking at now for the construction. But, it seems to me, rather than spending that money, just create Tree Farm Lane and start it as the construction road. Why isn't that being done in phase 1?
Commissioner Brown or Commissioner Cooney, would you like to comment on that? Okay, well, I like to say that I agree with Commissioner Brooks. Is just let's get that done. That seems to eliminate the majority of your problems, and you get on with your project. You've got a project that looks to be moving forward, and why get stalled for week after week after week? The people coming in and complaining about those two egress and ingress areas.
Well, let's cut it into 2 pieces. Merida, it's on a platter for you to say, okay, it's a public road through there, but we're not going to connect to Merida. So we've put it on a platter for you. We want it to be a public road, and there's every justification for it to be a public road. So if you want to say, and we're going to ask the supervisors that they never accept the offer of dedication of that last link, we're fine with that. We're fine with that. We're just trying to have some continuity of 10 years of planning that's going to be a public road. As to the link to Patterson, that is a long and expensive road, and it's millions and millions and millions of dollars to do that, because there's a 12 to 15 foot drop from Patterson that has to be all engineered and shored up. Patterson is widened. There's significant drainage that has to be taken from off-site and taken all the way to the creek. And if it didn't cost many millions of dollars, like $3.5 million or something like that, it would be an easy thing to say, well, sure, let's do that because we're going to do it eventually. But you've only got 20 homes to start out with, and to add that burden to it, the amount of traffic at the outset of the project is commensurate with how small the project is. And so as the project gets bigger, there will be more traffic. And we have this road connecting midway through. So whether the project is viable or not, taking on a $3.5 million obligation or whatever, we had some estimates on this before. At the outset, I don't know. But I know that it's specifically driven by that being by far the most expensive infrastructure part of the whole project.
Mr. Nelson, this is a matter of logic here. If you think the project is worthy of 124 or 34 units, obviously you think it's worth building. And phase 1, phase 2 is, you're doing phase 1 because of financial obligation or reasons. You think maybe you can sell the first 20 homes and then go to the next 20 or 30. That's not our problem. Our problem is making sure that you have a project that's compatible with a neighborhood, that you blend in and you get it done. And so whether you do phase 1 and you wait 2 years to do phase 2, that's not, if you do phase 1 and phase 2, maybe you sell all the units. I recall up in Lompoc, we had a project, and we asked them to do certain things, and they said, well, we can't do it. Well, they sold every unit before they even started the first unit, they sold every unit. That was the Bob Martin's project up there. Said, oh, we can only sell 12 units at a time or whatever. They sold every unit before they had something down. So you say there's a need for these units. You might be surprised that there might be people coming in wanting to buy phase 1 and phase 2 quickly, and you might have enough money to put that road in temporarily, whichever way, just to make sure that you don't have a problem and get forward with the project. If not, you're just, I really wouldn't want to see a project that takes 5 years to complete that's this small. This is a small project in comparison to other large projects. If there's a need, move forward.
Okay, I would just say that if this was 2006, then the whole dialogue and the whole thinking would be different, but it's not. It's not in terms of exploring the market demand and getting financing, and so our view of this is different than it would have been in 2006, and we're not trying to be insensitive, we're just trying to be practical.
Incentives for first-time buyers now are down to 4% and possibly to 3.85, so that's a big incentive for people to try and move into the units. That percentage rate is going to go up before long, so.
Agreed.
Commissioner Brown.
Mr. Chair, are you looking for a straw vote on these two issues to move forward, or what are, how,
I would
how
think
are we
that
going on this?
if there was a straw vote, I think that would be your option with respect to, it's your district.
Well, I don't have any preference, I just think
I'd like to tell them how I feel about, I'd like to tell you how I feel about it.
So is it appropriate that
Absolutely.
I put forth that the commission, if that's your druthers, that there would just be a straw vote on the Tree Farm Lane extending in phase 1 to Patterson?
Yes, that would be appropriate.
Okay, so maybe that's, I don't know how you want to call that, but
well,
maybe you want to discuss it before we
all right.
call the question.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Brooks.
Okay, I'm leaning in support of that, but maybe Public Works now, this is a huge financial burden on the applicant, but when you put a construction road, I mean, if they put that, would they have to do all that grading and all for the construction phase, to use it as a construction road, let's say, until phase 3? Would it really have to cost that much?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brooks, Public Works is open to different options, and we'll gladly review whatever the applicant puts forward. However, our primary concern of safety on a primary arterial is still going to remain the same. Construction traffic or standard subdivision traffic really doesn't matter when you have a left turning movement in the fast lane of a 4-lane road. A left turner is a left turner and increases the potential for rear end collisions. However, I'd like to add, though, that that can be mitigated with a proper construction control plan, but that has not been presented or reviewed by this department. So I'd like to say that we can keep an open mind and work with the applicant, but I don't know what the solution would be at this time.
Commissioner Brown.
Well, I was just going to comment. Mr. Nelson has made an argument that people get used to going certain ways, and without a road through Patterson, you're directing people back in through the neighborhoods, through Las Perlas to Agana and elsewhere to Merida, wherever. So it would just seem to me that if we're going to inculcate people with good driving habits of how to get out of the project, the road to Patterson would be what you'd want to install in the first phase.
Commissioner Cooney.
Well, I have to say, Mr. Chair, that I thought the applicant had an adequate solution to require construction traffic to approach from the north, provided it could be adequately enforced, and I don't think we have an adequate condition to require that. Even Mr. Nelson indicated he saw the condition we do have, which is condition 38, as being simply safety monitoring for the heavy construction. And I think that's what it does say, in fairness to him. So I guess I'd be inclined to say I'd rather get the money from the development sufficient to build a proper road with all the improvements on Patterson from Las Perlas to Patterson before we start the construction on Phase 3, because whatever we say about construction traffic in Phases 1 and 2 going west goes out the window if the construction of Phase 3 is right up against Patterson. I think it's unrealistic. So by the time we start that, I'd want to see the road in. There are other places that I disagree with Mr. Nelson as to when to pay certain amounts, because I think the impacts to the neighborhood are not with the 48th structure, but right away. I mean, we have impassable roadways at certain times of the day, and those are immediate. So even one more trip is going to have an impact. But on this narrow issue, I'd let him wait until the beginning of Phase 3.
Thank you. Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to upfront costs for developers these days to do projects. I mean, let's be honest. We're not getting a lot of people knocking on our door to build things today. And one of the reasons we're not is because it is such a huge upfront cost. I mean, I don't know what his other fees are, but I'll bet they're in excess of $1.5 million. So it's kind of like, let's see, before he puts the first stick in there, he's $5-6 million to cash out of pocket. It almost makes the project, even at 120 or 30 units, difficult to start, difficult to do. I think the compromise the staff came up with, that it started in Phase 3, is very reasonable. And the construction traffic, I think, for the first 20 or 40 homes is not going to be all that obnoxious. This is not a large commercial hospital project. It's a small housing development project, and I think that the route the staff has worked out makes sense. It's the most reasonable. If you're looking for a straw vote on the other issue, I'm ready to talk about that when you're ready.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Brown, are you ready for your straw vote?
Yeah. So, would you like to call it, or how are we doing this? How would you like to do that?
What is appropriate?
Mr. Chair, I'd recommend rather than a roll call seems like a formal motion.
No,
I just recommend that you go to each commissioner and just have them indicate where they're headed.
Just start on the right.
Okay, then I prefer that the road go through to Patterson at the first phase.
I also would like to see that done in the first phase.
And I would like to see that also. Commissioner Cooney?
I'd be fine with waiting till the beginning of Phase 3, but certainly don't oppose the idea of doing it up front.
Okay, fine. And Commissioner Blau?
My response is the same as Commissioner Cooney's. I don't oppose it being in Phase 1, although this is one of those issues where I want the board to know that we had this disagreement and that the straw vote was 3 thought it should be Phase 2, and Phase 1 and 2 should have been Phase 1. I think it's an important issue they may want to discuss.
I think the issue is about 3.5 to 1.5. I think something like that's how I read it. But you know, it's just it's not a mandate or it's not a dictate from us. It's just what our thinking is at this particular time. We want to see the project go forward, and it's getting stuck and mired in people coming and objecting about this. The objections I hear today are the same objections I heard the meeting before, you know, and at some point I'm sure that Mr. Cavaletto wants to move forward. How do I get past this, and how can I move forward with a project, and how can I do it without it costing me so much money in upfront fees? And I understand what he's doing, hoping that maybe there's some solution. As Mr. Robertson said, well, we can sit down and talk about this, you know, and so maybe there is some solution here, and Mr. Cavaletto and his staff can talk to our staff and Mr. Robertson and the fire department and collectively come up with some point after they've heard what the straw vote was. And with that,
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. Well, I don't want to disagree with you, but I do want to point out that what we're doing is setting the conditions of approval today to go forward to the board. As I understand the straw vote we just took, The condition is now going to read that he's going to be required to complete the Patterson Road construction and to put in Tree Farm Road in prior to construction, because that's going to be the construction road. Now, that doesn't allow him to go back to staff now and to renegotiate with the road department. If you wanted to do that, then I think we could modify the condition to say that he either puts the road in, the construction road in on Patterson, or some other alternative construction road as approved by Public Works. If that's your intention, I would agree with that also, by the way. But what we're doing with the straw vote is we're setting the condition to read that he will do that road first, and he has no choice to do anything else with staff or otherwise unless he comes back before the commission and the board.
Yeah, I don't think there's any requirement on our part, but it's a message that perhaps you can talk to the staff, Public Works, and try to work something out. But Commissioner Brown.
Well, you know, I understand what Commissioner Blau is saying, and it's, you know, for me, it's the issue of the impacts to the neighborhoods, and it is about construction traffic going through Avenue de Pequeña. I realize it's a public road. There are homes which do front that. There are homes that have backyards to it. I guess I just, based upon public testimony, I'm in support of what how the public feels about this. I think I understand the burden on the developer, but you know, this is a general plan amendment. There are certain costs and other issues associated with it, and I feel that that's, you know, what should be happening, that the burden, all the impact should be absorbed by the project itself, and it shouldn't be through any of the other neighborhoods.
True, and also we're not asking curb and gutters be put in and all the finishing touches. I mean, it's just something 20 foot wide that would meet the needs of Public Works and Fire Department. All right. Anything else?
I think, Mr. Chair, we have the issue of Merida.
All right.
And I guess the question is, I didn't understand, and since this was a very new proposal that Mr. Flowers brought forth about the offer of dedication of the green space, or whatever you call it, I don't even know, I don't know where to begin. I guess Mr. Robertson could articulate some ideas about that, or staff. You know, we haven't really, this is totally brand new to us, so I know you haven't seen it because Mr. Flowers got up there and talked about it and said, oh, I have this idea. So perhaps you'd, Bob, you'd like to discuss it again and just
Mr.
perhaps
Flowers?
be a little more.
Yeah, yes, please. Excuse me, Chair, for standing up. Am I not being heard?
Yes, please.
All right, a couple of points here. Because we had quite a lengthy staff meeting, which Commissioner Brown also attended, we had all these ideas floating around, and I tried to explain, because we did not have time. In fact, we spoke that day about refining the tentative map and the exhibits prior to the board. We just didn't have time to put anything other than the solutions that you saw here. And I'm talking about the roundabout now at Merida and that connection, to make it very clear again. And our intention would be that be done right away, so that the board, and maybe there's a way staff introduces this to commission for comments. You know, you're past your hearing perhaps, but you can take a look and attest to the fact that what I'm trying to explain is the case. So our first final map that's recorded with this project, as Mr. Nelson pointed out, that's his phase one with the road going through here. With respect to Merida, there would be no connection. There would be no physical connection. There would be an offer of dedication of a little piece of paper street here. There would be no improvements submitted with that final map for construction other than the roundabout itself and this roadway. Whether this be in its final form, it would be subject to staff, but we would introduce it essentially in the same place we had on a tentative map update. So that we are not proposing as a project that connection. So I thought I made that clear, but that's where we are. Okay? The county then would have the ability to not ever accept that. The idea, though, is that could be done. There's physical rights there's legal rights of use, but no physical connection. There would be no change. We'd offer no change to Merida here. That's the concept on that. With respect to this other issue having to do with the connection to Patterson, we talked, and maybe I didn't explain it clearly, and we didn't bring an exhibit. We have, our office, along with Public Works, for a number of years, have worked on the master plan for Patterson. The county did their own master plan, and there were revisions when we did these two tracks. There was money posted with this one for some improvements there, and we need to look into that, bring that for. But to make any kind of a connection here to Patterson Avenue requires a widening of the graded roadbed, okay, just to have room to do even a temporary left turn pocket situation. Our proposal as a project was to tie all of this with the Phase 3. Patterson Avenue improvements with final turn lanes, left turn pockets, full width up to beyond the project with sidewalks. And if the county funds can be brought forth to finish this, it also included that because it's final widening down through Cathedral Point to this point. So this being Sunrise Village. The idea of making a temporary connection in the location it is now is not something that we really relish. To make this final one, I agree with Mr. Nelson and others just from experience. I mean, the funding of that, when you take in these improvements, those improvements, the roadway is not the real problem. The real problem is, as I described earlier, the drainage construction involves extension of this pipeline, construction of a headwall and entrance condition for that pipeline with the excess flow going out in a pipeline all the way to the creek as a separate construction item for water not generated by this project. And so we end up with our own storm drain system for the project. But this one, you add up the costs, and I think the $3.5 million's light, okay? And to get financing for that, as Commissioner Blau has attested to, it's near impossible. Now, we could do some kind of an oddball thing. We can work with, I've used that, sorry, Will. We could work with Public Works Road Division, come up with some kind of a temporary connection, but it's fraught with, and I agree with the Road Division, with Will. You either have a county road to some standards or you don't. If you're going to introduce public traffic on it, you've got potential safety issues that we wouldn't want to design and Road Division wouldn't want to accept. You could do maybe something for construction traffic, and we could do that. But we, as a project, and we've done this a long time, we don't see that construction traffic is a problem. What we've proposed here, temporarily, there's some use here, but once it's on the project, the heavy equipment is operating on the project, except for and I told you earlier, the short time when we're transferring earth material across here between phases. That'll happen one time. So it just doesn't seem like that tremendous a problem to introduce this in its final form, in its final form with Phase 3. It seems very logical to me, the way it's been planned and sorted out, and the cost projections. It seems more than reasonable. I'd like to see you accept that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cooney.
Well, I think Mr. Flowers is passionate about his argument, and whether it's $3 million or $12 million, I think the commission's majority at this point is saying, let's do that up front. So his argument really should go to the Board of Supervisors at this point, and we should, unless others are willing to change their vote. So we're past that, and we're ready for the Merida connection. Okay. And as I understood Mr. Flowers, to say an offer of dedication would leave it up to the county to decide whether to open Merida or open part of it to bicycles and pedestrian traffic. But that would all be premised on that the rest of Tree Farm being a public road. So I think that's where we are, and we probably need staff input before we take a vote on that.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, before we go forward on this, I just want to clarify
Yes.
procedurally what we're doing. And by taking the conceptual votes and get what we're really doing is your commission's giving staff direction on what to come back with. So how to change the project description, how to alter conditions. So which it sounds like from where we're at today that we're probably not going to be able to resolve everything today. And so staff, we'd continue the project whenever your commission is ready to do that, with direction to staff to come back with these changes. So I just wanted to clarify. And then when it comes back to your commission, you take a look at that, you can still make further changes, anything that can be done at the time. But it also gives staff a chance to analyze any of the direction that you've given, to work with Public Works and Fire, just to make sure that we've addressed any concerns related to the project changes.
All right, Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would like to hear from Mr. Robertson now that he's heard from Mr. Flowers concerning this offer of dedication, since we hadn't gotten a comment from him.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, I think in theory there's nothing wrong with what the applicant has proposed. And in the past, Public Works has done many roads like this where we've accepted a paper road for future approval and construction. We can see that by what the applicant has shown us on the northern end of the property with the irrevocable offer of dedication. However, it's also been the department's experience that by postponing the construction of the road, in most cases, what you're doing is postponing any type of future opposition to another PC hearing during the 65402 determination, as well as to the board. So at this point, it may make everybody happy to do it, but if the county were to go forward and actually build that segment later on, is all we're doing is postponing the criticism and the fight for another day, which may or may not be appropriate.
Commissioner Brown.
Just to the issue of that the fire department would need a cul-de-sac at that end. Does this, what is portrayed, meet the fire department's requirements at the end of Merida? It does.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, the cul-de-sac does meet our requirements.
Well, it doesn't seem like it's a cul-de-sac. It just seems like it's a green space. Maybe I'm not.
Well, the way I understood it was going to be like a roundabout cul-de-sac end.
Right,
there.
but at the end of Merida, when we were in that meeting, at the end of Merida, you talked about it had to be a cul-de-sac on Merida.
Well, our recommendation would be on the other side, outside the development, to end that road properly.
Which is a cul-de-sac.
Right.
Even though at the southern end of Merida, that's just ended in the same stub. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Blau.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I don't have the lights, I just have to interrupt. Seems to me the real issue here is whether or not we make the connection to Meredith now or never. And then the second issue is whether or not the road becomes a public road or a private road. I think the compromise is that you make it a public road to the end of the cul-de-sac on Christmas Tree Lane, and if council can confirm that we can stick this developer with an obligation to create a cul-de-sac on a adjoining piece of property, that would be fine. As I understood the applicant, they didn't really care whether or not we made the connection with Meredith or not, but they were concerned that the road be a public road and not a part private road, part public road. So I think if we make the road a public road all the way to the cul-de-sac, and then we can have the easements for the water, sewer, bicycles, to the other cul-de-sac on Meredith, it just, to me, makes sense, and it makes all the neighborhood happy. I think they're making a mistake, by the way. I live in a neighborhood that has that same goofy arrangement where it's a straight-on street, and because of the politics of two subdivisions, they put a barricade up in the middle of the street. Looks dumb. No one can figure it out. Most of us wish it were gone, because now instead of going a quarter mile from my house to the country club, I got to go around 4 blocks to get around the barricade to get to go someplace. It's kind of dumb, but so be it. That's the way it typically happens.
So then how would the county proceed if it was to, and I don't mean to jump in here, but just
That's
the
all right.
question is, I don't understand how the county would proceed if this was what was before the commission to take this suggestion from Mr. Flowers to do this.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, my preference would be to get an indication of the commission's preference, but I need to take a look at this in a little more detail because this is new to me today as well, and I just want to make sure that we thoroughly analyze what the options are. So, you know, if the preference of the commission is not to open Merida Drive, then it'd be nice to have that preference so we can see what the options are. If the preference is to open it, then that might alleviate, you know, some of these concerns. So it'd be nice to have an indication on that so that we could do some work in between the meetings.
Commissioner Brooks.
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair Valencia. I think if I support what Commissioner Blau said about having Tree Farm Lane as all public. I think if, you know, depending on what other things happen, you know, to have that a public road throughout and having it end, you know, in its cul-de-sac. And I think because of something that happened not in my neighborhood, but very close by, I probably would go with option 1 right now. And I say that I spoke to Mr. Flowers, you know, during the break. And we did have a case where a subdivision went in. Neighbors in the existing subdivision were promised this gate that was erected, that it would be 20, 30, maybe 50 years before it opened. 6 months after that development opened, the gate was opened. And from rumor has it, I guess, you know, the neighbors were not consulted, that they just woke up one day and the gate was open. I think that the compromise with the green space and this paper road, it's, you know, I like that in the spirit of compromise, but I would be concerned that down, I won't use that expression, but, you know, many years from now that might come open, and that's what the neighbors don't want. So probably I am more comfortable with option 1 right now, but with the entirety of Tree Farm Lane as a public road, if it's possible.
Commissioner Brown.
So, Mr. Robertson, that could be the case here as Commissioner Brooks has described. In other words, we go through all this paperwork and set this up, and then one day it's, oh, this is a road, and it's everything that's been done through this project or through any other hearings is for naught. Is that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, that is true. At some point, we'll all be long gone, and and we'll have a road on paper here that it may not be for. We don't know what the future intent would be and why they would want to open it, but the option would be there, and yes, it could be open.
Okay, all right.
Commissioner Cooney.
Okay.
I understood from Mr. Robertson, and I'm as interested as everybody in seeing how we progress here, but I think the preference for the neighborhood, the existing neighborhood, and the benefit of the entire community is to have Tree Farm Road be public. But I heard Mr. Robertson say that if there was no passage through to Merida, in other words, if that was closed off and the subdivision ended right there in a cul-de-sac or some other means, public roads would not be, at least the staff of public roads at this, public works at this point would be not to accept Tree Farm Lane as a public road. So that's something we have to get by, because to me that's primary, and I'd rather go with the developer's proposal to make sure that we had it as a public road.
Ms. Van Mullen, Council, I'm sorry. We're here to amend the comprehensive plan, to rezone, to approve a development plan, to approve a vesting tentative map, and to name some roads, and to determine a land exchange, and to certify an EIR. Are we off base? Did we miss the target?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, no, I don't believe so. I mean, we're just doing small, I mean, the way I understand it is the Commission's just looking at some pieces of the project now. I think there's a lot more issues to cover before we would get to taking action on all of these. But this is part of the project that is proposed, right? These are just individual issues of the larger project.
Okay. Commissioner Brown, how would you like to proceed on this?
I think that because this is new today, it needs to go back to staff, and staff needs to come back, and we look at whatever language, whatever you devise for it. County Council has time to look at it, and it provides us more clarity, because we can sit here and discuss it all day, but there may be some issues that County Council comes up with, and I think that we need to have a little more certainty of what it is that we're looking at. There may be some issues that come forth. So that would be my proposal. If that sort of seems to be the gist of what I hear the Commission saying, is they're in favor of that, but we need to know exactly what the detail is and what we're in favor of.
Give them another chance to work at it.
Right, but I think it's basically having this green space and a barrier and an offer of dedication and a paper road. I think that's the basic.
Okay. How does the other commissioners feel about that? Commissioner Cooney.
I do agree that we need more time, not only for this issue. Maybe we could spend more time today indicating what other issues we need to have worked out. We're running out of time in this year for hearings, and I'm mindful that that we can't do it the rest of November. So we're really talking about putting this off for a month till the first meeting of December. And I'm fine with that. It's an important project if we can get the work done in that amount of time.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and Commissioner Cooney, I understand, and perhaps Ms. McCurdy knows, that I think there's going to be a request for continuation of Park Hills Estates, if I'm not mistaken, next week. Is that true?
But we're gonna miss one of our commissioners next week. That's why I'm looking past November.
Okay, all right. Well, I think there's some couple other issues I think we need to address, and if maybe the Commission doesn't want to do them today. They might be fairly easy ones. But anyway, if you would answer Commissioner Cooney's question, Ms. McCurdy, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, in terms of just the question of the timing, we are looking at a continuance for the Park Hill item, and as someone said, our hearings between now and the end of this calendar year are really quite full. So in terms of finding another hearing date for the Park Hill item, one thing we were discussing was whether the Commission would be open to an additional hearing date, and the one that I've discussed with the parties that are involved in both the Cavaletto and this project is December 5th, which is a Monday. I don't know how that works with the Commission, but we do know that staff is available on that day.
It gives me some time.
You'd be there, yeah.
I'm fine with that.
It's fine. So, Mr. Chair, are you expecting me to, just based upon what I'm hearing, is continue this without
Ask for a continuation.
So you don't want me to just even put forth the other issues that
well, if you'd like. Commissioner Brown, this is your district.
No, I understand, but I'm just trying to get some direction here, Mr. Tuttle.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, I think it would be helpful for staff to get some direction on some of those other issues that I know you're interested in, so that if we are going to come back in December, we're prepared to come back with everything.
Okay, then I'm going to make, before I make that motion, I'm going to give you my list of issues. And I'm would like to have a brief discussion about the ag viability issue, and also the park fees. I know the applicant, the Commission hasn't received the documentation, but I'm aware that there is documentation where the applicant is requesting a 50% reduction of his park fees. And that's going before the Parks Commission tomorrow. So that is one of the issues that I would like to address. Apparently, and County Council can confirm my comments, that the reduction request ultimately goes to the Board of Supervisors to make that decision. But I would like to talk about applying some park fees to the bike bridge. So that's going to be one of my issues, and then I'm going to like to go over some of the conditions too. So
Okay.
So,
Does
anybody
Commissioner-
else got any other things they'd like to put forth?
Commissioner Cooney.
Well, I'm right with you, Commissioner Brown. I'm happy to go on to other issues.
Okay.
The bike bridge was here. I understood we might have a nexus issue, but I'd love council to give us a thought on that.
Right.
And if we can accomplish that, that would definitely be an amenity worthwhile for the neighborhood.
Right.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, I also have starred the bike bridge, the building of the bike bridge. Probably at some point I'd like to discuss the burying of the utility lines again. We were just at a cursory mention of that, but and again, I think I had talked to staff about the possibility of burying all the utility lines, and maybe you could come back and for public input, or not for public input, but just to let us know exactly what that would entail. And I understand, there's some scientific studies, that say that it's not safer to, put the high power lines underground. But I'd like to discuss that at least next time. I think that's it for me.
Then, Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion to continue the meeting to December 5th.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
Ms. McCurdy.
I'm sorry, if I could, I just wanted to add that it would really be helpful to get some direction from your commission as to the affordable housing condition and what you'd like to see. And then finally, in terms of the issue of Merida, is there consensus on a condition you'd like us to work on?
Well, I think we need to hear from staff to get some other sense about what is being proposed. I mean, I'm not ready to do any condition until I sort of see that paperwork and have a discussion, have county council look at it. So it may be premature to do that.
Okay.
All right.
And,
Thank you.
and maybe perhaps in consultation, Mr. Tuttle could, with county council, could come forth with a proposed one. That's the best I can do.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second? There was a motion.
Well, is there a motion?
Yes. Yes.
I made the motion,
She
but
made the
we
motion.
maybe, Ms. McCurdy would like to hear from us on affordable housing. So I'll postpone making that motion until we get some sense about the affordable housing.
All right. Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on the issue of Merida, I think there is general agreement, at least, that we'd like to see a solution which involves not having Merida go through, but we want to do it in a way that preserves the opportunity for Tree Farm Lane to be public. So if we can't do that by this latest suggestion, then I think we're back to a complete closure option, and we need to look at how the street improvements are financed. With regard to affordable housing, I understood from what Mr. Nelson has written and addressed us regarding today is that he would like to see a little more flexibility in which option is chosen than we have the ability to give. I think we have to come down in our recommendation and the supporting conditions and findings with a solution. And Mr. Nelson will correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought he said it would be acceptable to build the project as 8 rental units for low income and 16 units for at market or below market, but with certain parameters according to a plan that is similar to what has been adopted by the city of Santa Barbara. I'm okay with that alternative, but certainly open to others as well. That does accomplish the ability to justify the state density bonus. If we come up with one that doesn't, then I think we have to relook at the whole project in terms of what's being allowed here for the number of units.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Brown.
You know, I have some concerns. I have some of the similar concerns that staff does about the proposal for these 16 units. where there's no income eligibility requirements, so how are they affordable? You could have a millionaire living in one of these things, and it's, you know, this housing should be really designated for people in certain income categories who really need this housing, and to me, this is just not an acceptable proposal. Maybe there's some other permutation or something that the applicant could bring back, but I don't like it. I think there's got to be some other way to accomplish it.
Commissioner Brown, if I may say, there are 4 categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate.
Right.
They were very clear to say that the first 8 were very low, but then the next 16 did not get identified in which category they went.
Well, it's just there's no income eligibility requirements required, so I'm not sure how that fits with our affordable housing.
Commissioner Blau, did you want to?
Yes, I did. I don't think it does. I mean, we don't have the kind of program he's describing, nor do I think we'll ever get one like that. But I think if he does 8 very low, unless I missed it, he meets the requirement for the state, for the density bonus. But and I think what I heard him, what he's going to do is he's going to put those into a regular triplex, subsidize the rent, and then if he comes back to us later on when the inclusionary housing program is modified and pays in new fees, then those 8 units could go to the market rate, and then he wouldn't build the other 12 units that he's entitled to. But if I'm not clear, he can maybe clear that up by the next meeting. But I agree, you can't do, you know, no income verification and that sort of thing. We don't have any program in our county that tells us that's affordable housing. And I think the city of Santa Barbara is making a mistake anyway. I'm not sure we would ever conceive of a program that would work like that. So I guess I'm agreeing that that needs to come back with some more clarification.
Commissioner Brown, Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Probably, you know, when I look back at the 24 affordable rentals with the on-site manager, I guess to me that seems more of a community benefit. I think I'm okay with the 8 very low rentals, and I understand that would, he would achieve under the state density bonus, you know, what he needs to do. I too have many reservations about the iffiness, if you will, of the City of Santa Barbara project and the terms that comes into, and especially in this fluctuating, well, it's not fluctuating, in the market we're in right now. You know, who knows when that's going to change, and that I would like to see with other specifications if that's the way we're going to go.
All right.
So, Mrs. McCurdy, have we, and Mr. Tuttle and Ms. Salman, we've gotten the issues, so I could make that motion to continue, all right, to
December 5th?
December 5th.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, second. Any further discussion? Mr. Villalobos, call for the question.
Commissioner Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks.
Aye.
Commissioner Cooney. Aye. Commissioner Blau.
Aye.
And Commissioner Valencia.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, thank you. And that, Ms. McCurdy, anything else before we conclude?
No, I have nothing else. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. McClellan. Nothing. That concludes the meeting for today. Thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned.